Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, December 12th, 2023 business meeting of the Olympia City Council. For the record, we have a quorum this evening with Councilmember Payne remote. And with no announcements, I need to receive a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have an agenda approved. Takes us right to item 2A, which is special recognition. And tonight, it is the pending approval of a resolution of the City Council of the City of Olympia, Washington, calling for an agreed-upon ceasefire in Israel and occupied Palestine. I want to preface the reading of the resolution with some notes. We recognize that the conflicts between Israel and Palestine began well before the tragic events of October 7th. Since that day, communities across the world have responded with outrage and grief at the staggering loss of life and the thousands injured in Israel and Palestine. Tonight, our council will be presenting a resolution calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Israel and occupied Palestine. We've worked on it literally right up until last night, taking in as much feedback as we could. We understand that city government and these chambers are the closest, most accessible door to power for our community members. And many community members have shown up to vent their anger at what's happening in the Middle East. We've learned from all of you. As a local elected body, we don't have the influence to sway events in the Middle East. So we've been reflecting on what our role is in this and where we might have some sway and influence. Where we landed is that our sway and realm of influence is here at the local level. There are many voices demanding that the council approve a ceasefire resolution, and there are also voices asking that we do not do one. Please know that we heard all of you. We listened deeply and sought counsel and advice from faith, educational, and cultural leaders in the community who are being impacted by the effects of the conflict. We sought out the perspectives of advocates and residents concerned with this issue. While we found shared shock and outrage about what's happening in Israel and Palestine, we also found that the leaders we talked to shared differing perspectives from each other. Likewise, even those of us on council have differing perspectives, but we're united in our anger and sorrow at the loss of life and injuries and the trauma associated with both. We accept that some in the community will think this resolution does not go far enough, and then that others will think it goes too far. Many of you will not hear your words repeated back to you in this document as you've asked. Simply put, we move this forward knowing that not everyone will be satisfied with the words in this resolution. But the resolution will help us focus on our energies where we can have true influence here at the local level. It makes commitments that can be kept here in our community, like a commitment to use our resources to fight hatred and bigotry in Olympia, a promise to partner across faith, cultural, and educational communities to deepen our shared understanding and our values in Olympia. We also commit to sending our resolution to the members of the Washington Congressional Delegation, so they will see and understand our collective anger around these events. And the resolution will add Olympia's support for the congressional ceasefire resolutions H.R. 786 and H.R. 3103, which call for the promotion and protection of the human rights of Palestinians living under Israeli military occupation. We are grateful to live in a town with such a compassionate community full of members who have engaged us around this issue, and we will still listen. Thank you. So I'll now read the resolution. Whereas Palestinian and Israeli people have a shared future that is inseparable, and we affirm the right to exist for both Palestine and Israel. And whereas all human life is precious, and the targeting of civilians, no matter their faith or ethnicity, is a violation of international humanitarian law. And whereas since October 7th, armed violence has caused the loss of a staggering number of lives and has wounded thousands in Israel and Palestine, and we urge the prevention of any further loss of life or harm. And whereas hundreds of thousands of lives are at imminent risk if an immediate, sustainable, and agreed-upon ceasefire and end to this war is not achieved and humanitarian life-saving aid is not delivered without delay. And whereas the release of all Israeli hostages and all Palestinian prisoners who are unlawfully detained without due process must be prioritized. And whereas this global violence may result in increased violence, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and anti-Arab bigotry in Olympia, and whereas the City of Olympia is committed to the safe and humane treatment of all its residents, and now therefore The Olympia City Council does hereby resolve, Section 1, to call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Israel and occupied Palestine to end the current violence, for humanitarian aid to be given to those in Gaza, and for the release of all unlawfully detained citizens. Number 2, to commit city resources in preventing and responding to hate crimes, such as acts of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and anti-Arab bigotry, as outlined in our Reimagining Public Safety Plan. Section 3, a commitment to partner with local, community faith, educational and cultural leaders to begin conversations and develop actions to reduce anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and anti-Arab bigotry, and also to engage the broader community together around understanding our shared values. Section 4, a copy of this resolution will be transmitted to the members of the Washington delegation to Congress and add our support for H.R. 786 and H.R. 3103 to our federal legislative agenda. So at this time, I'd entertain a motion to pass this resolution.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution passes. So this will be signed at the earliest, at our earliest convenience, and will go public on our website. So thank you for your understanding. We are now going to move on to public comment. And I want to just note that there's been behaviors, I guess you'd call them, across not just our state, but across the country, where people have been signing up remotely into city council meetings in progressive cities and acting like they belong here, or that they are that they are community members, but they're not, and they will start off pretty rationally, and then they lead into hate speech. So we are prepared to shut anybody down that is trying to disrupt our meeting remotely with inflammatory comments and hate speech. As well, I just want to remind, since there's a lot of people that don't normally speak, that we do have some rules around public comment. So you may address the city council regarding items related to city business, including items on the agenda. This is a limited public forum, meaning that the chair of the meeting can control the timing and you know, just how it runs. As well, I want to note that we cannot accept comments regarding any kind of a candidate for public office or a ballot measure. There's nothing really current, but we are heading into a presidential year. Number 4, or my fourth piece, is that we cannot listen or accept comments where the speaker makes a personal attack on someone's honesty, integrity, reputation, or attributes protected under Washington State's law against discrimination, including hate speech. So with that, we have a 2-minute clock. We are going to start with people in chambers that have not spoken before, and then we're going to move to people that have signed up remotely that have not spoken to us in the last 30 days. That's for fairness, because some people have been here frequently, and we want to hear from people in the first half hour that we have that we might not have heard from before. We have, let me see, 12, we have about 20 people signed up. With 2 minutes, we probably won't make it in the first half hour. But what I try to do to expedite public comment is I'll call out 3 names at a time, so you know to get ready in the queue. And if you're in chambers, you can even feel free to stand up and kind of line up so that you can come to the microphone quickly. And you know, who knows, we might be able to get through everybody in the first half hour. So I'm going to start with, in chambers, I've got Konya, followed by Eris Dialande, followed by Cora Barker.
Hi. My name is Konya. I'm a local farmer and artist. I stand here tonight in solidarity with Palestine. I read your resolution, and you spoke it tonight, and in it you failed to address Zionism, apartheid, settler colonialism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, forcible displacement, and it excludes any mention of crucial historical context or any mention of U.S. military aid. Where the endorsed community-drafted resolution does address and include these vital elements, it's clear that your resolution does not reflect the interests or intentions of our community at large. You've chosen to water down the community-endorsed draft resolution, and that has not gone unnoticed. I urge you, City Council members, to reconsider this resolution. I demand a resolution that actively motions towards Palestinian liberation by addressing Zionism, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, military occupation, U.S. arms supply, just to name a few. Because as we know, the flow of U.S. arms to Israel is unprecedented. No country has received as much congressionally mandated aid as has Israel. Stopping the flow of U.S. military aid to Israel is one of the biggest influences we can have in ending Israeli violence. So I don't see why this is, why is this not mentioned in your ceasefire resolution? I can only assume that you've left this topic amongst the exhaustive list of other topics out of your resolution because to publicly address the Israeli Zionist occupation is to potentially risk damaging your public image and/or for profit. And that speaks volumes to me. I expect more from my representatives, and I'll remember this in the next electoral term. Free Palestine.
Thank you. Next, I have Eris Dialande, followed by Cora Barker, followed by Eva Leach.
My name is Avis DeLande, and I'm a senior in high school. I'm here because City Council's resolution for a ceasefire in Israel's war on Gaza is not enough. Unlike the resolution drafted by community members, City Council ignores that Israel is a Zionist colonial project founded on violence and ethnic cleansing. This resolution doesn't acknowledge the United States' role in funding this genocide financially, politically, and militarily. The resolution doesn't mention racial segregation and violence against Palestinians. This resolution leaves ambiguity when the situation demands nothing less than City Council supporting an end to the violent occupation of Palestine. The community has spoken through actions, vigils, and meetings. Olympia has spoken up. Now will City Council have the courage to as well? We demand nothing less than a permanent ceasefire, an end to U.S. military support, an end to apartheid in Palestine, ethnic cleansing and genocide, Zionism correctly defined as a racist ideology, an acknowledgement of settler colonialism and the historical roots of present-day violence, Israeli war crimes and violations of international law, pro-Israel and arms industry lobbying, and laws restricting free speech and criminalizing Palestine. Solidarity. Free Palestine.
Thank you. Next, I have Cora Barker, followed by Eva Leach, followed by Cindy Corey.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and staff. My name is Cora Barker, and I live, work, and vote in Olympia, Washington. I've come here, like many others, to bring awareness to the ongoing genocide of the people of Palestine, a genocide which has been fully funded directly by the United States taxpayers, your constituents. Upon reading this resolution, I was disappointed but not surprised to see that you haven't directly condemned the violent occupation of Palestine by Israel, an occupation that has lasted for 75 years with the blessing and financial backing of the United States. I urge you to re-examine this resolution. I urge you to explicitly condemn the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, and I urge you to call this what it is, a genocide. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Thank you. Next, I have Eva Leach, followed by Cindy Corey, and then we are going to jump to, and then followed by Terrell Bradley.
Hello, my name is Eva Leach. I've commented many times these past couple months, actually, but many of us here have been writing to you, educating you, hopefully been giving you information that you took home and researched. We wrote a resolution calling for an end to U.S. military aid to Israel, an end to the military occupation of Palestine, and a permanent ceasefire, and many more topics, most of which were not touched on in the watered-down resolution y'all just passed. Our resolution had the support of almost 250 individuals, organizations, and businesses from our community here in Olympia. Your resolution doesn't mention apartheid or the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. Your resolution doesn't mention anything prior to October 7th, erasing Palestinian history of 75 years of struggle against the settler colonial project of Zionism. Your resolution doesn't mention the current forced displacement of 90% of Gazans. Your resolution doesn't mention racial segregation and violence against Palestinians. Your resolution implies that Palestinian prisoners are criminals when most of them are minors and incarcerated for bogus charges or held without trial, while also implying that the IDF is innocent, all the while massacring tens of thousands of Palestinians. Your resolution refuses to acknowledge the vast disparity in the scale of violence experienced by Palestinians versus Israelis. We will continue to show up for Palestine. We will continue to call for an end to the siege, the blockade, the occupation, the kidnapping, the starvation, the apartheid regime, the attacks on healthcare and children. Free Palestine.
Thank you. Next, I have Cindy Corey, followed by Terrell Bradley, followed by, then we're going to switch over to remote. And Larry Jezza will be first.
I'm Cindy Corey with the Rachel Corey Foundation for Peace and Justice. I want to thank you. I appreciate that you've passed the ceasefire resolution this evening. And I also want to thank our community members who have, during the past 2 months, watched all that's happening and have taken action and continued to take action, and also have contributed a great deal to the discussion about this resolution. During my travels, I've evidenced since 2003 that Olympia is known around the world for our attention to the issue of Palestine. And I'm grateful that tonight the world will see us acting with the passage of this resolution in support of the Palestinian people in Gaza and elsewhere. I know your job is challenging and very difficult at times, and I hope very much that you'll continue the work and that this resolution will be a beginning, not the final step that you take on this matter. I do want to say that there's one area I want to address. I feel that the resolution does fail to reflect the lack of symmetry in this conflict. And it was my Jewish Israeli friend and colleague, Jeff Helper, who pounded that into my head, that there was no balance in this situation, no symmetry between the occupied and the occupier. Palestinians have lived for 75 years in an ongoing Nakba under 57 years of occupation, and according to major human rights organizations, including B'Tselem in Israel, under apartheid. So I just encourage us all to continue to learn and to work together to see what we can do to improve that situation. Thank you.
Thank you. So next I have Terrell Bradley, and then we're going to go remote.
So Tyrell Bradley, I incorrectly read the instructions and thought I was signing up to attend this meeting. I relinquished my time to everyone else.
Thank you. Welcome. All right, so we're going to go to our remote speakers, and I do the best I can in a limited amount of like 5 minutes before we go live to order these things, and sometimes I don't always get it right. So I'm going to go with Larry Jezza, followed by Daniel Stusser, followed by Kyle Schrader.
Larry's traveling. He's somewhere in the tunnel.
Mr. Jezza, you're muted.
Okay, so I start over again.
Sure.
The MFT program is not what Olympians want.
I'm so sorry to interrupt again, Mr. Jezza, but we can't hear you very well. We can barely hear you.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me see what's going on with my microphone here. Speaker, condenser microphone is on. I'm here twice on your thing for some reason.
I don't
Can
know
you hear
whether
me
it's on
now?
our end.
It might be on your end.
So if you can just speak loudly. Whether it's on our end.
Okay, I'll speak loudly. I will.
So if
How's
you can
this? Is
just
this
speak
better?
loud, that's better.
Okay. Okay, I'll speak.
So we'll start the
very
timer
loudly.
now.
Thank you, I'm sorry. The MFT program is not what Olympians want. They don't want to pay higher taxes to give tax breaks to wealthy developers. As both Thurston County Democrats and signatories to the West Side Housing Principles have said, we need to stop giving tax breaks for market rate development. You now acknowledge that this program is not a tax loss to the city, but rather a tax shift, where the public's tax rate increases to pay for the tax giveaway. But amazingly, your response is not to restrict the program, but to expand it. Currently, this program makes taxpayers pick up the tax bill even for buildings that have $4,000 a month water view units. Support for the claim that without the incentives, market rate housing won't be built is manifestly not in evidence. Jay Lark said so, and you only have to look around at the facts on the ground. Presently, 82% of the planned housing units are multifamily. There are over 1,700 market rate multifamily houses in the pipeline, most of which are not eligible for the MFTE. Lacey is growing even faster than Olympia, and yet has only one MFTE development, while Olympia has 11. Tumwater, as of 2023, doesn't have any market rate MFTEs. You're sugarcoating this bad idea by requiring some of these market rate developments to give 25% of their tax back to the city for affordable housing. But in most of the city, all you require is 5% or nothing. Imagine asking voters to pass a home fund program with 75 to 100% of the tax increase going to enrich developers and not going to affordable housing. Ask yourself, if this program were brought to a vote of the people, by what margin do you think it would fail? Olympians care deeply about housing, but also about fairness. We can do better than what you have before you, including area zoning, for example, to provide housing for people in need. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Daniel Stusser, followed by Kyle Schrader, followed by Alexander Nur.
Daniel is traveling.
Good evening, council members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Looks like you can. The timer's going. My name is Danny Stusser. I live in South Olympia, and I'm speaking to you as an individual citizen, not in my professional capacity. I'm opposed to the multifamily tax exemption as I read the draft in your materials. I see no reason to subsidize market rate housing in Olympia. I'm very interested in inclusionary housing, in housing that subsidizes people at arbitrarily 80% or less of the average median income. So I hope you'll take another shot at multifamily tax exemption, but reserve the funds for units that are for people who need affordable housing. I will relinquish the rest of my time, and thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Kyle Schrader, followed by Alexander Nair, followed by, I'm going to do those two, and then I'm probably going to, sorry, it is skipping around a lot. So I've got Kyle Schrader, followed by Alexander Nair, followed by Robert Thomas.
Kyle, it doesn't seem to be signed up correct right now,
Okay.
but Alexander's. Yeah, Alexander's traveling.
Okay, how about now?
Sounds great.
All right, perfect. Let's see. All right, we all ready?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my voice. I'm going to do my best to speak for those who could not be here tonight as well. I'll be as clear and simple as I can. I'm not here to convince you about what's right and wrong. People far better than me have been tirelessly pointing out through every avenue that they can that the genocide happening in Palestine is dire, inhumane, and one of the most disgusting chapters in our world's history. It is also a bloody and vile stain in our great country, as we have not only stood by and done nothing as children are slaughtered, but pretend there is some justification. My elected leaders in the chamber here tonight have failed. You have spectacularly failed. You have taken a humanitarian issue and decided to play politics with it. Your craving to keep your positions of elected power have convinced you it is morally justified to sidestep this issue or speak out against the atrocities in Palestine as a justifiable measure for Israel. You have failed to do the right thing, and history will look back at your meek display of political neutrality as a damning example of the corruption of politics. I am sure plenty of your fellow chair members will tell you later you did a great job sitting there today and listening to your failures with a stoic expression. They will try and help your feelings by telling you politics and the Palestinian issue is complicated. The only way this issue is complicated is because you spend so much of your effort and time and power trying to convince a corrupt and disgusting portion of our country that you can walk both sides, that somehow you can say you hate violence but fail for months to lift a finger to save innocent lives in current peril or make any meaningful action to protect the ones who are in danger in the very near future. More children will die because you took so long to try and play both sides of a political game that results only in losers. So remember tonight when you tell yourself you did a good job handling a complicated situation that myself and thousands upon thousands of Americans have seen you fail, and we will remember. History will remember. You will feel that shame darken any meaningful accomplishment you ever made while in office. I hope the senseless dead lives you failed to save when you had the chance haunt your dreams. It's the least you deserve. Good night.
Thank you. Point of order, I've been letting this slide, but during public comment, we ask that everybody stay quiet after there's a commenter, and that's to be respectful of other views that there might be in the room, and as well, to save time. So when you clap like that, it just eats up more time on the clock. So consider that. As we go on to, next we have Robert Thomas, followed by Karina Greenlee.
Robert is traveling.
Good evening, Council. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. Thank you for your time and for the consideration of this important issue. I would like to reiterate what many of our speakers have been saying tonight about the lack of historical context to the resolution and how we can do better and we can do more to speak to the ongoing genocide in Palestine. I want to also emphasize that there seems to be a fear from our politicians that supporting Palestine or even criticizing Israel in any way is seen as anti-Semitic, and that Zionism is historically is a relatively new European phenomenon that has nothing to do with actual Judaism, historic Judaism, and actually makes the world less safe for the Jewish people, including people within my own family. I urge the Council to take more direct actions. We say that there's little we can do, but there is more in terms of boycotts, divestments, and sanctions to the Israel apartheid government that can be taken on our local level. Similar actions against other regimes have been effective and fully warranted in this case. Thank you, and free Palestine.
All right, next we have Karina, we're back to in chambers. Karina Greenlee, followed by Peter Lewis, followed by Michelle Ryder.
Good evening. My name is Karina Greenlee, and I am 19 years old. In your resolution, you demand the release of all Israeli hostages and all Palestinian prisoners. Oxford Languages defines prisoner as a person legally held in prison as a punishment for crimes they have committed, and hostage as a person seized or held as security for the fulfillment of a condition. Why do you consider the thousands of Palestinians, many of them children, currently detained by Israel as persons legally held? Why do you consider legal the actions of a government responsible for the ethnic cleansing of a population? Why, each time throughout your resolution, do you refer to Israelis and Palestinians in that order? Why do you reference Palestinians as an afterthought in their own genocide? You claim that your resolution included feedback from the community, but the resolution we put before you a month ago is the resolution we wanted passed. Your resolution does not acknowledge Zionism as a perpetuating factor in the conflict, nor differentiate Zionism from Judaism. Your resolution fails to acknowledge historical context. It fails to acknowledge vast disparities in the scale of violence, that 20 Palestinians have been killed for every one Israeli. Your resolution does not even mention ethnic cleansing or that 80% of Gaza's population has been displaced. Your resolution does not mention the role of U.S. military aid, nor does it condemn it. The resolution you have passed goes directly against the will of the people. In ignoring your constituents, you are ignoring the role of government, which is to be our representation. Wake up. You're trying to get reelected. We're trying to stop a genocide. Good evening.
All right, so next we have Peter Lewis, followed by Michelle Ryder, followed by John Oren.
Hello, my name is Peter Lewis. I'm 17 years old. As a citizen of Olympia, all I can feel is shame in the people we've chosen to represent us. I have lost faith in you and the system behind you. Faced with images of children shell-shocked, bleeding from the head, parents wailing as they're pulled away from the rubble, hospitals reduced to ash and stone, leaving babies to decompose on tables, you turned away. You heard the crying, the screaming, even from your own citizens here in this room, and your solution was to meet behind closed doors and come up with a resolution that says nothing of genocide, U.S. involvement, or the historical context of 75 years of occupation. Nowhere does your resolution differentiate between ethnic cleansing and violence against Israel. Nowhere does it condemn the U.S.'s involvement or the millions of dollars of military aid we're sending to Israel. I am ashamed of you. Never again will I trust the Olympia City Council or the U.S. government at large that it has its people's interests at heart or that it's for anything other than profit and status quo. This resolution means nothing, says nothing, and fixes nothing. Your constituents proposed a compassionate, well-thought, and community-endorsed resolution that you have ignored. Do not pretend that you care about us. Free Palestine.
Next, I have Michelle Ryder, followed by John Oren.
Hello. I really hate being up here, I'll be honest. Marhaba, assalamu alaikum, my name is Michelle. I want to thank everyone on the council for working hard on a ceasefire resolution. Your efforts are deeply appreciated. At the same time, I wanted to stand up here one last time, I hope, to acknowledge who is missing from your process, as far as I've been informed. And that is the Palestinian voice, or a Palestinian voice. So I asked a friend of mine who is a member of the Olympia community but wishes to remain anonymous if he wanted to speak publicly here while acknowledging the risk it posed to him in the atmosphere of increased hate. And this is what he told me. I don't mind speaking in public, but more than being scared of being personally targeted as an immigrant, I'm afraid for my family to be targeted in the West Bank. There are numerous stories of names surfacing, and the next thing you know, an Israeli bulldozer shows up at their house in Palestine. I wish that my friend's journey to the U.S. was rewarded with the promise of the freedom to speak freely, but it appears that Israeli repression of the Palestinian people is so thorough that no place is safe, no place truly free for our Palestinian friends to openly share their stories, hopes, and dreams. Though I do believe that if done with care and earnest effort, you could create the space for the group of people most impacted by Israel's war on Gaza. I'll end with a little bit of Arabic, the language missing from the process. El-wujud huwa el-muqawama li-ash-sha'b al-Filastini. Existence is resistance for the Palestinian people. El-alam ma'a Filastin. The world is with Palestine, as you can see today with the UN General Security Council vote. Shukran. Jazilan. Sorry, I want to say Gazilan, which is actually the Egyptian dialect. But shukran jazilan for your time.
Thank you. Next, I have John Oren, followed by Stephen Dallaire, and we'll end our first half hour with Elsie Siebel.
In 2014, Palestinian author, educator, activist, and mother Nora Erekat spoke in Olympia at the Washington Center with Angela Davis. The event was called Yet Again as Captives, Mass Incarceration in the U.S. and Palestine. Nora and Angela illustrated the connections between the carceral systems of the U.S. and Israel, as well as their colonial histories. I learned more of the ways in which the U.S. and Israel do business together, and of the rich and lengthy history of Black and Palestinian solidarity work as they face the same systems of racialized violence and oppression by allied colonial powers. The other week, Nora posted a question on her social media platforms. I just need to ask folks, insistent on proving Hamas is the greatest evil on earth, does anything you say, if completely true, justify an unfolding genocide? Would you apply that as a principle to deal with societies of quote-unquote evil regimes, just trying to understand what's at stake here? What's been at stake for the last 75 years is the freedom, safety, and right to return for Palestinians. We know that our freedom and any possibility of true peace in the world is bound to the freedom and liberation of all occupied people. Over the past several weeks that the community has been working on getting the City Council to make a statement and pass a resolution for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, there are several words in which no council member has spoken out loud: occupation, siege, ethnic cleansing, genocide. These are the words that describe the settler colonial violence in occupied Palestine. Last week, each council member was asked to make an individual statement on their stance with the hope that you might differentiate your voice from Mayor-elect Dante's pained fixation on the violence of October 7th without context of its causation, that you might be courageous enough to name the genocide happening in Palestine. The resolution may have passed, but you can still use your position of power to combat the repression of Palestinian freedom and solidarity work here in Olympia, across the country, and at higher levels of federal government. Will you?
Thank you. Next, we have Stephen Dallaire, followed by Elsie Sable, and that will be the completion of our first half hour of public comment.
Hello, my name is Stephen Dallaire, and I am a human being, and it's very clear to me that this issue is basic human rights, and the complete disregard of genocide, apartheid, also as this issue is an indigenous colonizer issue. The complete disregard of that feels absolutely strange and cold. The resolution feels cold and heartless and like just filling in the blanks of because some people have come in here and said some things, and now we have to do something. And it's okay, like I realize you guys don't have a lot of power, you're just our city council or whatever. You know, maybe that's the way you feel about your position, and maybe that's the way I feel too. But also in basic human rights, I feel like it's imperative that we use our voices. And also, Mayor-elect Payne, I just wanted to respond to something that you said last week about, you know, why are people now just attending to this issue about Palestine? And I also just wanted to respond to that defensiveness that you have about this and say that the time is now, and when things rise and when the consciousness of things rise here and now, to where more people in the public eye realize and recognize that this is something that needs to happen, the time is now. There is no other time. And that's just something I want to say. And also, you know, I hope that you're not proud. I also remember you saying that, you know, that you're proud of this. So, you know, hope you go home and just aren't proud. Thank you.
Next, we have Elsie Sable.
Hello, my name is Elsie. I'm an 18-year-old living here in Olympia. First of all, I would like to thank you for trying to pass a ceasefire resolution, and I would also like to thank you for the adjustments that you made to it, for removing, this is from what I remember, so I thank you for removing the use of the human shield narrative. And also thank you for asking for the release of all Palestinian hostages instead of just the agreed upon ones. However, these are low-hanging fruit and lacks many critical components that all of the wonderful people here already told you about. So instead, I'd like to use my time to put this into perspective one more time. So I'd like to hold 1 second of silence for every 200 people killed in this conflict. For Israel, that is 1,147 deaths, which is 5 seconds. Thank you. And now on the Palestinian side, we have 18,200 deaths, which amounts to 91 seconds, which we do not have. So I will spend the rest of this time in silence, and I hope you'll join me.
Thank you. And now I will open up the dais for any questions or comments. Start with Councilmember Madrone.
Thanks, everyone, for being here. So, as I'm sure you're all aware, last Friday, the United States was the sole vote to veto a resolution from the United Nations that would have called for a humanitarian ceasefire. And I'm really glad that we have a resolution in front of us this evening to show that we do support an immediate and permanent ceasefire with unanimous support from the Council. I do think that that's really powerful. And I think there's also legitimate criticisms of the resolution, including what Cindy Corey mentioned. It fails to reflect the lack of symmetry. You just mentioned the death toll, but there was just another update from Al Jazeera this evening. 18,412 Palestinians compared to 1,147 Israelis. So that's the lack of symmetry that we're talking about. And I really, really appreciate everybody who has spoken to us in public comment, reached out, met with us, emailed us, about the occupation in Palestine and the war in Gaza. This is a human rights issue, it's a civil rights issue, and I really appreciate the people who are keeping Palestine front and center, and those who have been doing that work for decades. It's too easy to bury ourselves in the day-to-day business of the city and of our lives, and forget that the people of Gaza, almost half of which are 18 years old or younger, are living in constant loss, fear, and trauma. And that demonstration of all those children's shoes, I was moving. So thank you for advocating. Thank you for educating on this issue. I've learned so much, and I've committed myself to paying attention, learning as much as I can about the history and the present situation, and doing what I can to help. I am a different person because of your activism.
Thank you. I have Mayor Pro Tem.
I want to echo Councilmember Madrone's appreciation, and also to call out that in the resolution that passed today, besides broadly calling for a ceasefire, it calls upon us to continue a discussion, a learning and a discussion in the community. And as the last public commenter said, you're all wonderful people. There are also wonderful people who have different understandings about what's happening. And I think that's one of our jobs, is to create, as Dr. Grossman Zoltan was suggesting, more people to start having a picture of the map, more people starting to have a picture of the history, so that we can have a conversation that's not just polarized, taking sides. So I'm I'm hoping that you'll continue to push us to really make true having the pledges that we made in the resolution, to have a continued discussion, because it won't have legs without a push. So I really appreciate your being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Councilmember Parsley.
We are all changed after October 7th and before. Your words have been heard. And I have to echo Councilmember Madrone and Mayor Pro Tem. It's pretty emotional to sit up here and see your pain and open up the e-news and see the pain. It's a tough road. But I also wanted to highlight, and what I fought hard for, and the council unanimously agreed, it's not just enough to say we agree with a ceasefire, but we have to commit to actions going forward and getting an understanding and bringing all the voices in and seeing what we can do for the future. That's what's important to me about this resolution. It's not just our statement, but we are committing to something.
Thank you. All right, we are now going to move on to adoption of our consent calendar. I need a motion.
So moved.
Second. All right, I've got several polls that.
We can't move on yet. There's, y'all still haven't mentioned apartheid, ethnic cleansing, billions of dollars to U.S. military.
I put my,
mass starvation as a tool of warfare, military occupation.
Point of order.
Point of order. Persons in the audience shall refrain from behaviors that disrupt the public meeting. This includes.
Okay. I move for immediate recess.
Aye.
Welcome. Auxiliary, part two. You probably staff reports. Yeah.
Okay. Are you guys hearing him? Okay.
Ask Dante if he can hear us. I don't know whether.
Dante, can you hear us?
Yes, I can, and I heard Lisa ask if I can hear.
Great. Okay.
Sounds like we're back.
Wow, you got really good hearing. All right. Good evening and welcome to the extension of the Tuesday, December 12th, 2023, 6 p.m. business meeting of the Olympia City Council. For the record, we have a quorum with Council Member Payne remote, and as well, we are coming to you from room 207 at City Hall. And I will have our city attorney, Mark Barber, explain why we are upstairs.
Council has moved to room 207 to a secure location due to the fact that the council meeting downstairs in council chambers was interrupted by a group of protesters. This is pursuant to RCW 42.30.050 of the Open Public Meetings Act.
Thank you for that. When we were last together, we had just approved tonight's consent calendar, and I was mentioning that we had several pools. So I'm going to start with the first ones, and that is items related to the Transportation Benefit District Sales and Use Tax of 0.1%. Those are items 4H and 4I. And I'm going to ask Mark Russell, our Director of Public Works.
Good night.
proposed use of the building, and then finally the ability of the tenant to accept some degree of the financial obligation for tenant improvements and operating expenses with a desired outcome. Next slide. So with that information, we crafted a request for proposals. We launched on September 1st. We did develop a website that hosted all of the information. You can see that on the right-hand side. On that website, we had a copy of the request for proposals. We included a video of the 228 study session for those that were interested. They could get that deeper level of context associated with the conversation. We did have an appraisal that was done in 2019, and we also had a building condition report. We posted both of those on the project website so that the applicants could understand the value of the building at that point in time and the state or condition that the building is in. We did collect a series of historic documents, things associated with the layout of the building, when renovations had occurred, historic photos, we did post those. And then we also, in an attempt to provide fair and equal answers to what had been posed, we collected all of the questions that came into us during this process and during various site tours. We collected all of those questions. We submitted them to staff that had the expertise to answer them, and we posted all questions so that everybody had equal access to the information. Responses were due on October 25th, and we'll get to the results of those in a couple slides. Next. We did have a development and review team. We met before the RFP went out, and we reviewed the RFP as they came in. The top folks there were our internal review team. You can see a cross-departmental. We have folks from facilities, cultural access, historic preservation. We had a member of our building department, and as well as somebody from our Parks and Olympia Center. From the external team, we did have two neighbors of the property. Shaina Waisaki is the, I think she's actually the current board president for the Olympia Downtown Alliance and also owns the business across the street. And we had Monique Osa, who her business is up the street as well. And she also serves on the City of Olympia's Parking Business Improvement Area Advisory Board. And then Annette Pitts with Experience Olympia and Beyond, and our Lodging Tax Advisory Committee also served as a reviewer. Next slide. We asked for information in 4 areas associated with the responses tonight. I'm not going to summarize all 4 areas. As a part of your staff report packet, we did include a proposal summary that will go through the 4 areas here, but tonight I will really just be going over the proposed use of the building, and you can see the items that we asked there. And then next slide. I will be going over a proposed transaction summary. So I won't hit every point. Tonight, you will not be making a decision on who to move forward with. And we'll explain that in a minute. But I just want to give you an understanding of the transaction and the use, as those are really, I think, the biggest pieces associated with these proposals. Next slide. So the 2 proposals that we received are here on the front. We had a proposal from the Olympia Arts and Heritage Alliance, effectively for a history, arts, and cultural museum with some additional related uses. And we had a proposal for an independent historic hotel called the Ladder House. Next slide. So on that summary, the first one, you can see here, their concept is to build and provide artist studio space, classroom and workshop space for K through 12 college students, a retail shop, and a small cafe, in-person online access to exhibits and historical documents, and meeting rooms available for community groups. That is actually a direct quote from their proposal. So that's what we've excerpted out. Next slide. And the proposal that they have from a transaction standpoint, they're looking for a subsidized lease. And they articulate in their proposals a variety of articulated community benefits, specifically a free and reduced cost access for individuals to the facility. They are looking for a 25-year term with an additional 25-year extension. And they did articulate a number of points. These were pulled from the proposal. They are looking to have the city provide a commitment to renovate and improve the building shell, building systems, meet ADA requirements, address seismic, sea level rise, security, and internet needs. They are also looking to have the city maintain the building shell in good condition. There's another number of bullets here associated with the city's responsibilities in a transaction that they would like. So have the city maintain the HVAC, electrical, emergency generator, internet safety, security, water, sewer, drain pipes. They also would like the city to provide an annual monetary allocation for repairs or maintenance undertaken by AHA. They would like the city to pay for utilities. In the proposal, they also did include the concept of a welcome center. It was a little fluid, but if the idea was to have a welcome center as a part of this, that they would want the city to staff that and have the city take care of the some of the insurance requirements for the building. They did indicate that the city would have no responsibility for the programming of the museum, that they would take that for themselves. Next slide. The latter house is what we may call a boutique hotel, in the sense that it's not a traditional chain-like model. It's a smaller in size, more niche design. So the latter house is a private business enterprise, and they are looking at a 28 to 32 room hotel. You can see on the right, there is some renderings. You can see those better in the proposal. It's pretty hard to squeeze that into a screen that you can see, but they do look at rooms on the top floor and bottom floor, and they do vary in size. Some of the rooms do have all the facilities, like restroom facilities in them. Some of the rooms, there are shared facilities like you would see at some of the newer hotels in other markets. And then they even have a bunk style room. They say that this hotel will boast a multitude of destination amenities, including featuring goods from local shops, a lush walled-in outdoor heated soaking pool, an intimate event space, a covered outdoor patio, cafe, cozy bar, opportunities for socialization and relaxation in the common spaces, and even a covered rooftop deck. They do have on the bottom floor an event space. You can sort of see that center in the design. Next slide. Their proposal is actually a purchase of the property. So they would, and we did articulate in the request for proposals a desire to lease the property to maintain ownership, but we did add some language effectively saying, if you want to propose an acquisition, you need to articulate why. Why is that required? And so ultimately in their proposal, they say due to the extensive nature of the tenant improvements to be paid for by the development team, that effectively that's the model that they would have to go. Said differently, they would be incurring the cost for all of the renovations and observed deficiencies with the buildings and tenant improvements and things of that nature. To get financing to be able to do that, they need to own the building. Their purchase price is proposed at $500,000 and was derived essentially from working backwards from the proposed cost of improvements in the respective business plan. That's not an entirely uncommon model. It's like a residual value model. It's typical when you would see a seller that has a desired use, and then the buyer is saying, well, if you want that use, I need to reverse backwards to get into a price in which I can operate. It is not typical for when you would have a broker and just list a piece of property. That's not typically how you would derive at a value there. Their offer would be contingent upon a 120-day feasibility, in which they would collect bids, do a formal pre-submission with the city, and determine the viability of the proposal. Next slide. So we did have, I met with both of the parties, the stakeholder teams, the internal and external, provided them effectively a scoring matrix and the two proposals. And what I ultimately heard back from them is essentially, we don't know how to score these. These are so vastly different. You're asking us to compare apples and oranges. So it was not possible for them to ultimately come up with we do that rank 1 through 10, and they could not do that. Again, that was due to the variation in use, transaction style, and the ongoing financial commitment by the city. It was raised to attention that both proposals would need to clarify how they would address parking. That was absent in both proposals. Both proposals would be a change of occupancy from a building standpoint. So you'd be using it in a different way, and how that would bear in terms of costs of renovations would need to be articulated. It wasn't truly clear that the respondents knew what those costs would be in their proposals. There was also questions raised about the degree of initial and ongoing financial commitment required by the city. This includes potential increased staffing expense that was raised by the internal team. Also that there were currently, we do have competing capital uses or needs that are currently identified as a higher priority. There are potential impacts on the Olympia Center in both proposals that would need to be evaluated. Both proposals are in full alignment with the downtown strategy. It's consistent, the use is consistent, the concept is consistent. There's an activating function with both proposals. So there wasn't disqualifying, like this doesn't meet the need. They both meet that need. However, and this final bullet is really where we're at, that there are still significant questions that would need to be answered by both respondents to be able to make a confident decision in either proposal. And so if we could go to the next slide. I am not asking for a decision on which one you want to go to, but I do need feedback on how you would like to proceed. So I've presented two potential paths forward, and if I could maybe get some feedback. So the first one is pretty traditionally how we've done it, or things like this, where we'll host a council study session. We would get a list of questions to the applicants. We would have them give a presentation, and they would answer any questions that council or staff may have provided to them. Option 2 is a little bit different in the sense that I think it gives, it would move us to working with the respondents to flesh out some of the ambiguity or questions that still persist in both proposals prior to any presentation or action by council. With that, I'm happy to take any questions. That is the last slide.
All right, thank you, Mike. I think these are great proposals for us to consider, of course, as a path forward, because neither one of these proposals is just right. And we all know that, sometimes people put forward an idea and they're asking for the moon, and because that's where they kind of feel like they need to start. But I look forward to, the council discussing this further. So who else? I'll go to Councilmember Huen.
Initially, I really like option 1. I think it's a more open and a more fair of both RFP proposals. I did hear you also say that you would give them the questions in advance so they're not sort of blindsided and have to pinch hit. So I like that. If we did do option 2, I'm dying to be on the subcommittee, so I'll just say that now. But I do like option 1. I had a question. The last bullet point you said, as far as sort of trends from the stakeholder group, you said there are significant questions for both proposals. It would be great if council could see sort of like the trends of like, what are those questions from the stakeholders?
That's really kind of what I raised in those bullets 1 through 6. They were variations of those items. Where are people parking? How are we paying for this? Is that the right sales price? Those are transactional questions. Those were the kinds of questions that we have. I tried to summarize them into the 6 bullets above, but they were all sort of in that theme.
I see. Thank you. That's helpful.
Right. They're a little bit slow up here. Work. So next I have Councilmember Parsley, followed by Mayor Pro Tem Gilman, followed by Councilmember Cooper.
Mine's more procedural, I guess, to a degree, about the 2 options. And I, like Councilmember Nguyen, would love to be in a subcommittee, but where I'm sitting is one seems fairly open and fair, but I worry about the first one, which is going to a study session. What's the next step after that? Are we going to an action to accept or more work? And would a subcommittee be something we'd want to do prior to a study session so that when we get to the study session, we can be instructing staff to something?
I think that's a very good question. At some point in time, what my hope is that I can bring you a recommendation for you to move forward on. At this point, as the staff person, I can't confidently do that. And it's also even recommended by the stakeholder team that we're not there yet either. I think both options to move forward are viable if they give you, the council, the necessary information to then be able to give back to me to be able to synthesize and move forward. I think that your assumption is probably right, that a subcommittee that may do some preliminary work, and then maybe it's a presentation and and sort of public Q&A. That may be a viable option as well. So you could absolutely blend my proposals.
I'm leaning that way, partly because there's a lot of passion on one of the options, and I would hate to have them come to a study session and then tell them, we have all these unmet questions from the council that you need to go back and guess what, we're not ready for you. So I would rather have a study session where we're a lot closer. And I think having the council members there, a subset of us, would be a good idea so that we're not doing a false advertisement to them.
Okay. Next I have Councilmember Gilman, followed by Councilmember Cooper, followed by Councilmember Madrone, and Councilmember Payne. Or did you want to comment? I saw you come up back on screen.
Yes, I did. I was going to raise my hand in a bit. Thank you.
Okay, I got you.
Right. Well, I agree with Councilmember Parsley that I think there's some work and some conversation that's just necessary. And I think a subcommittee would be a great approach for that, because frankly, in an hour of work session, we can hear a presentation, we can ask some clarifying questions, but we're not going to help flesh out. And I believe we do have a role to help flesh out these proposals, and to leverage the resource we have at 108 State. So I would also very much like to participate in that process, although we may have to Rochambeau. We'll see how it goes with the interest along the line here. But, yeah.
All right, next I have Councilmember Cooper, followed by Councilmember Madrone, followed by Councilmember Payne.
Thank you, Mayor Selby. I'm much more in favor of drawing straws, Mayor Pro Tem. So I have a question, Mike. How common is it to be able to get or try to get contractor bids in 120-day feasibility? That seems like a lot to me.
That would be, well, you can get fair estimates. I think that if you were looking for actionable bids, that to draw up a bid package and go through that process, that does not really seem likely. Can you get a general contractor to be able to provide construction estimates in that period of time? Yes.
Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I'm in the hybrid version. I think, for me, it's not clear to me that there's a winning proposal here at all, and neither one of them are ready for a business meeting. And just to be short, so would love to flush them out and see whether. One of the challenges I'm having is similar to what I read in the lines in the committee is how do you know which is right without something else, right? Like, and I think I said that to Mike when I read the packet is we don't have the third option to make it so we can kind of compare them to something else as well. And that might be something we want to look at as an approach as well. Either some sort of, reentry into the RFP world if we don't get there in a longer conversation with the applicants, or some other city use of the facility. Even for me would maybe be a hybrid of where these proposals are coming from, which I think are both things that would benefit our downtown. So.
All right.
And I want to put my name in for the straw drawing.
Rock, paper, scissors. All right. So next I have Councilmember Madrone, followed by Councilmember Payne.
If it helps, I don't personally have strong feelings about being on the subcommittee. So, not that I don't think this is very cool, and I'm not, I'm excited about it. I'm wondering, do either of these have an expiration date? Like, if they don't hear back from us by a certain day, like they're gonna decide to do something else?
I have not determined that. I will say that the AHA group has been steadily working at this for years now. So I wouldn't imagine that there is some sort of date at which they go, now we give up. So that doesn't seem likely. The other one, it's possible. I mean, when you're talking about a potential private investment and a transactional deal, people could be looking at other opportunities or weighing out other options, or perceive a degree of difficulty with a transaction in which they go, man, maybe this isn't the right deal for me. That's possible. I have not vetted those out with either party yet.
Okay. And I was primarily speaking about that boutique hotel option. Do we have like a we have a ballpark estimate for the boutique option for, what we would sell the building for, because it was in their proposal. Do we have a ballpark estimate around costs associated with AHA?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a couple of things that we can come to a conclusion on. We did in 2019, we did do the building condition assessment report, and there's several observed deficiencies associated with that building that were identified in the report. The report effectively said here's I believe it's about $1.4 million worth of items that you would need to address in the next 5 years. And this was done in 2019. Yeah. And then here's another $1.7 million worth of things that would need to be repaired in the following 5 years. So it does give us about $2.7 million worth of observed deficiencies that we would need to plan for if we were the owners of the building for the next decade or longer. So that's, when there is the conversation about the city owning and maintaining the shell of the building and things of that nature, that's one estimate. The other piece is there is conversation in there about the city being the entity to cover the expense associated with renovation. That's one piece where I don't have a clear understanding of what that cost would be at this point in time, as there isn't the physical proposal associated with these are the things that we would want renovated. Take this wall down, open that, fix, so those are additional costs. So I don't know what that would be. And then we can make some assumptions when it comes to utilities and maintenance. We do cover utilities and maintenance with other city buildings that we own. I did pull, let's see here, and it is included in the staff report. I took a look at the Timberland Library building as a comparable example. It's an older building. It's a little larger, but in 2022, the operation and maintenance expense for the Timberland Library building was $101,000. The city utilities was $12,520. And PSE, electricity and gas, was another almost $20,000. So that can give you kind of a range or an idea. My guess would be about $100,000 for operational facility and maintenance expense for a building like that, especially one that's a century old. And you're probably around $30,000 a year in annual utility expenses if we were to incur those expenses.
Since Mike mentioned the library, and you all know how much I like to talk about the library, maybe that's a potential third use of the building. I'm just kidding. That's totally on the fly. Just making conversation. So I just want to, one of the things that I want to be careful about is, I mean, we talk about budget impacts for all the things we're doing. We're looking at our 10-year projection, and I'm concerned about, you know, something that would require a lot of city resources. And I know that there's grants out there and all that, but there's also competing things for those grants. The Armory comes to mind. And so I just want to flag that as a concern. You know, like I said, I don't think it's insurmountable if we can find the resources to do it. But we have one project where, you know, and I've previously said I would love for us to hold on to the building. When we did a study session on this before, like not very interested in selling it, but also Artisans Group is a really great community partner that we have. And so, like, you know, when I saw that proposal, I was like, well, you know, if the right partner comes along and that's what they'd like to do, I'd entertain that. And then on the other side of that, we have this really, really wonderful community group who's got this beautiful vision for a museum, and it has a high price tag to it for us. So those are the things that I'm weighing as I'm thinking through this. And you know, I think bringing it to a subcommittee to kind of dig through that and figure out what's right for the city, I'm fine with that. One thing I just want to be cautious of, though, if either of these is a clear no, I don't want to ask people to do a lot more work. I just don't think that's fair. And if you know, and I also want to see our, you know, the AHA group be successful somewhere. So, you know, if not this, then where? So that's just some of the thoughts that pop up for me.
All right, Councilmember Payne, your turn.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Madrone, you basically took the words out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say, is that I think option 2 is going to give us, I think, more time to really mull over what it is that we're going to be asked to take on with one of the proposals. And I think we need to do our due diligence with that work. And with option 1, I just feel like we might, it's a bit more of a time crunch. And so I think, as we talked earlier about sort of blending the two options, I do think that would be the most appropriate way to go about this. Mike, thank you so much for the presentation. It's been a long time coming. I'm really excited. I also would like to add my name to the straw drawing. You know, my one question is, you know, what sense of a timeline are we thinking for this hypothetical subcommittee? Should we institute one?
I will tell you from a work plan perspective, we've started this project, and so it has to remain priority for me until it's completed, or we've made a decision one way or the other. So I would ideally, this needs to be wrapped, in my opinion, in Q1 of next year. So I would like to be able to move quickly. So if we could identify the subcommittee in the next 2 weeks, and then I could start scheduling out how to proceed in early January would be the ideal situation. So I think that depending upon also part of the questions that we ask the respondents to get deeper into, we may need to be able to give them adequate time to be able to respond. So as Councilmember Cooper mentioned, you know, we may need to understand a higher degree of the cost example for what does renovation actually look for, or cost. this renovation or this building condition assessment that was done in 2019. Those are 2019 numbers. I'm assuming that inflation has done some interesting things to some of those costs. So we would even need to update some of our own content on there as well. So I think that there's a series of due diligence steps that we would most likely take, but I do think it's reasonable to expect that we could complete this work in 3 months.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. It's exciting to be here. It's exciting that we're finally talking about this and that we're just, looks like we're turning a page here. Thank you.
I had a couple questions still. So number one, I do support the hybrid of starting with what probably would have happened anyways, to have a subcommittee that would have been brought to full council anyway. So anyhow, you guys should do the subcommittee, and that'd also be a time, I think, where you can make it iterative, give feedback to the people. I want to use that at least once more before I was gone. Because they do need some coaching, both of them. And so that's a great opportunity to do it, kind of in a lower stress, situation. And then I think it would be helpful for council to also have access to the process and the contract for the Smith building. That was the last time we did an RFP.
The Pear Blossom Smith,
Place.
okay. I can pull that process up.
Yeah, because
find some of the data there.
Some of us were here when that was kind of either coming to culmination, and they had an ask, like as far as like the cost of the building and then some starting cash, and then what was my other one? Yeah, so I get the council access to that, and then also just understand the Smith building wasn't historic, right? It wasn't as emotional to people as you saw tonight out in Chambers. There's a lot of emotion, passion, great emotion. We saw lots of emotion too tonight. But yeah, regarding the 108 state proposal. And I had one question was, you mentioned a change of occupancy. Well, before it had public access and it was actually public benefit. So a museum art center would be public access with public benefit too. So what's the change?
Yeah, that's a very specific question, and it actually comes through our building official and their assessment of building code. So I don't think I could confidently answer, but we did have somebody from the building department take a look at this, and they indicated that it would be a change of occupancy associated with that. Now, there's different types of change of occupancy, and so that would trigger different outcomes or requirements. So I don't know if I could I don't think I'd be confident in giving the detailed answer there, but that is an area that on both proposals we'll need to dig into a little bit.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I had, and good luck. Oh, sorry.
Madam Mayor, we have some straws to draw, and perhaps we should let Dante select a second from the people in the room to draw his straw.
No.
I also asked, do you want to have 2 or 1? It doesn't make a difference to me.
We want to have 3.
3.
Okay, you can have 3.
3 people. That's not even a question. You need 3. Yes. Okay, Councilmember Wynn.
Okay. I appreciate the enthusiasm, and I understand that these statements are probably going to make me unpopular should I be on the subcommittee. But could I please ask the mayor to go through what I thought was really, really thoughtful, and I could have really learned from what your points were. There was a lot of organizing, getting the sticks, perhaps rigging the sticks. So it was a little distracting. Do you mind? I thought they were really, really enlightening.
So I think probably that the gist of it was mostly talking about the Smith building, which was the last RFP we did for a city building where we gave it away with some money. And in this case, it was Family Support Center to develop a women's shelter, women's and family shelter. So again, public benefit. So, and it was greatly successful. So I think that there's some learnings there for this council. And then as well, the change of occupancy, was that also what?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think Mike's going to get back to you because there's some nuances based on, the proposals, that there wouldn't be the same type of change of occupancy. So one might be a more, whatever, complicated change of occupancy. I'm thinking of a hotel. Yeah. So, yeah. So.
Thank you.
Yep. So I think that's it. And then now I understand. I was like, they were digging out knives, and I was just like, what is going on here? So now that I know, are you comfortable doing the drawing now? So is everybody okay? And, okay, so you want to give the rules for the drawing, Danny?
So, in this hat are 5 knives.
Okay.
3 of them are unbent. So if you get one that has not been bent,
okay.
See how it's got a little
white mark,
stress mark?
Yep.
Yeah. If you get one that's not bent, then you get to be on the committee.
Not bent.
Not bent.
Too bad, so sad.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dante, do you want me to do your drawing for you?
Yes, please. I was just going to ask. I need a proxy. Thank you.
Okay. Grab it and get out. I'll be your proxy. Okay. Yeah.
I'll start.
Oh my God, reach behind me like this.
It's like cutthroat here.
So I can't see.
All right. One.
Close your eyes.
This is unbent.
Unbent.
Oh,
All right.
not bent.
Do not believe it.
Don't look. Don't. That's your
Whatever. I'm getting scared as I go down.
Your knife might be
Unbent.
Unbent.
Oh my gosh.
Next time spoons.
Unbent.
Oh, too bad. So sad.
All right, you guys can arm wrestle later on. Okay, so yeah, no, he's getting all concerned. No, I was the proxy for Dante. It's getting late. We're not even half done. All right, so just for the record, we have Councilmember Payne on the subcommittee. We've got Councilmember Parsley on the subcommittee and Councilmember Cooper. Is that right?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
thank you. And the gracious losers.
No.
All right. All right. I won't. All right. So thank you very much for all of that. We're going to move on to item 6B, which is the proposed regional housing allocations for Thurston County. This is a briefing. There will be no action. And I want to thank our guests, Allison Osterberg and Michael. Is that right? Michael Ambrogi? Or no, we've got Mark Daly. Okay, so standing in for Michael Ambrogi is Mark Daly, the executive director of the TRPC, and thank you for your patience so much. It's been a night. So we are going to turn the floor over to Leonard Bauer because he's going to be teeing this up, right? There you are.
Correct. Yes. Leonard Bauer, Community Planning and Development Director. And yes, as the mayor mentioned, this is a briefing, no action. It's a briefing on a recommendation from a work group made up of the planning directors of the cities in Thurston County and the county staff. And that recommendation will eventually be going to the Thurston Regional Planning Council for action. The recommendation is around how to allocate the housing needs over the next 25 years that the Department of Commerce provided on a countywide basis, how to allocate those to the various cities and the urban growth areas and the rural area within the county. This is required by state law, and these allocations will be the basis of our housing chapter of our comprehensive plan. So it's an important item for us to know what we're planning for, and we were the beneficiaries of some great work by the Thurston Regional Planning Council staff. Allison Osterberg is here as planning manager. Michael Ambrogi did much of the work as well as senior planner, and unfortunately fell ill today. And just acknowledging the executive director, Mark Daly, is also here. So I'll turn it over to Allison to walk you through the process that we used, and then I'll come back at the end to talk a little bit about what Olympia's allocations would look like under this proposal.
So good evening, Mayor, Council members. Allison Osterberg, Planning Manager with Thurston Regional Planning Council. And I'm so pleased to be able to speak with you tonight about what's been a really great collaborative regional process to tackle a really small part of what is just a huge discussion in all our communities around how are we planning to provide housing for people at the levels that they're at. And so this is just a really small piece of a lot of work that you all are doing, and we're happy to help provide some support for the work that still needs to be done. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So I am standing in for Michael Ambrogi, my colleague who developed this presentation. And so forgive me, I'm sure I won't do quite as good a job as he would do, but I will try to cover all the points he wanted me to hit. So this planning effort came together as in response to legislation that was passed in 2021. That asks local jurisdictions as part of their comprehensive plan update processes to plan for and accommodate housing that is affordable to all economic segments of the population. And what was different about that language is that by planning for and accommodating, in our process, we really wanted to recognize that most housing is built through the private sector. Jurisdictions do not build most of the housing, including many housing that's affordable to many folks. But jurisdictions do need to demonstrate through this change in state law that they have the policies and regulations in place that will enable housing that is affordable for folks in our community to come into existence. And the phrase all economic segments within the guidance from the law, it's pretty specific. This law is, a lot of guidance came out from the State Department of Commerce. And when we're talking about different economic segments in this effort, we're called to look on really specific income levels for moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income households as are defined by the Federal Housing and Urban Development Department. And this process also asks us to look ahead to plan for and accommodate emergency housing, emergency shelters, and permanent supportive housing. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So the new requirements build on a lot of work that's already happened and that is underway. All of our jurisdictions have done a lot of work around affordable housing. We talk about it in our countywide planning policies. You already have policies in place in your comprehensive plans. We have housing action plans, homeless crisis response plans. Many other efforts are underway, and these requirements really just build on that work. The new element that was put in place by the legislation is that it puts numbers to, it asks us to put numbers to some of these ideas we have for planning for different economic segments. And the idea is that jurisdictions need to identify the number of households in each income range that they are planning for and document that need in their comprehensive plans and demonstrate that they're shooting not just sort of generally to meet all needs, but that there are specific numbers that we're talking about. You can go ahead to the next slide. So who are we planning for? As I mentioned, the legislation defines seven different housing types. And as an example, when we're talking about emergency shelter, those are temporary shelters for individuals and families that are experiencing homelessness. And emergency housing, public supportive housing is the low barrier subsidized housing. And then we have those different income categories. I do want to call your attention to, as part of the numbers that you'll see later in this presentation, we do talk about the amount of housing that's needed for the higher income folks in our community. And I want to clarify that in the law, Commerce, as part of these requirements, Commerce doesn't require jurisdictions to plan for housing for folks who are making greater than 120% of the area median income. But we are required through this process to make sure our totals add up to 100%. And by nature, lots of people in our community make more than the area median income and also need housing in our community. And so because of that, we often get questions about why is there so much housing in this category? Well, the lower income categories have a lot of breakouts and are looked at in small increments. And then that greater than 120% area median income is kind of the remainder or the rest. So go ahead to the next slide. What we know is that the need for housing in our community is great. That's something that's very clear already. This chart shows the number of housing units that are affordable to different income groups now, and those numbers are expressed as a percent of the area median family income. So currently we have around 120,000, a little bit more than that, housing units across Thurston County. And about 40% of those are affordable to low-income households or households that make 80% or less of the area median income. And looking ahead, what we see, go ahead to the next slide, is that need is only going to get greater in the future with the population growth that we're expecting. So Thurston Regional Planning Council, we do a lot of projections around population and housing need. And we project that across Thurston County, we will need to add an additional more than 54,000 housing units between 2020 and 2045 to keep pace with our growing population. And that 54,000 number is already included in our forecasting that we do. And the new part that comes as part of this legislation is that the Department of Commerce, the State Department of Commerce, has provided us with some estimates about how that need should be broken out by income ranges so that we have sufficient housing for the different people in our community. And what we see is that the need, no surprise, will be especially acute for the lowest income households. We're seeing a big increase in the need for housing for very low income households. And in part, that's because we don't have enough on the ground to meet the need that we have today. So you go ahead to the next slide. So this chart, those charts, we're looking countywide. How are these numbers distributed countywide? What we did through this process is, and what Karma's charged us to do, is that we have to take those countywide numbers and think about how that countywide need needs to be allocated across our different jurisdictions. So the way that we went about doing that, we had some guidance from the state, and what they said in the law is that that was up to jurisdictions at the countywide scale to determine how they want to distribute the need for housing. And that process should be multi-jurisdictional. It should be collaborative. All jurisdictions should have a voice in that. And the jurisdiction need, however you slice and dice it among the jurisdictions, needs to add up to those totals, those countywide totals. Go ahead to the next slide. So just briefly, this is a brand new law, a brand new process, and we were not the only ones dealing with it. We had the benefit of learning from jurisdictions whose comp plan schedules is a little bit ahead of ours, but it was something where we had to pull together something pretty quickly to have a product in time to meet the timelines for all our jurisdictions who already have their comprehensive plan update processes underway. And so TRPC contracted with the Thurston County and the cities of Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, and Yelm to provide some support for this new requirement. And that our work program was to review the different methods that were available and provided to Commerce, help our jurisdictions come to consensus on a preferred method for allocating that housing need across our jurisdictions, and provide the data and information to inform that discussion. And we had those meetings. We met several times with planning directors and managers and staff from the different jurisdictions, worked through the different options, and are here to present the preferred path forward for that. So what we're doing now is we're presenting that option to all the jurisdictions, and we'll also be presenting to the Regional Housing Council. And the request from that work group is that these recommended allocations be approved by Thurston Regional Planning Council, since Thurston Regional Planning Council is already the entity that does a lot of that forecasting around population forecast and housing forecast, buildable lands analysis, that helps allocate things across our jurisdictions on the population level And this is in line with work that we've done so far. And so because it's a new product, it's a new process for us, but the recommendation from the group is to use the process that I'll walk through and to have TRPC approve it. And then it will be up to the jurisdictions to document those allocations, how it breaks down for your jurisdiction, and develop policies in your housing elements of your comprehensive plan that shows how you're going to meet that housing need. Go ahead to the next slide. So when we met as a group to talk about how we wanted to do the allocation process, the first thing we talked about was to come to some agreement about what values should guide how we decide how to do this. And the values that came up that everyone agreed upon and that were shared is that however we allocate housing need, it should be fair, which means it should be distributed across our communities and not just located, that not all low income housing needs to be just in one community versus others. And then, but at the same time should recognize that there are differences between our communities and differences in what they have. The methodology should be clear, it should be relatively easy to communicate to elected officials and members of the public. It should be easy to replicate in the future because we'll likely need to do it again. And it should be cooperative. It should build on the information basis we already have, the structures we have for working together, and should be supported by all of the different entities. So as part of that process, we used these values. We reviewed 2 allocation methods that were provided by the Department of Commerce, and TRPC staff also checked in with staff from other counties, including King County, Kitsap County, Pierce County, and Snohomish County, to find out how they had approached this question and what they had done. And I'll talk through those methods. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is a really simplified example to show the different main methods that existed and what this group landed on. So let's say we had a sample county, and within that county, there are 2 communities, and each community has a mix of orange houses and blue houses, but they're not the same amount of orange houses and blue houses in each community. And we know that based on future population and housing trends in the future, each community overall countywide will need 4 more blue houses and 4 more orange houses. You can go ahead to the next slide. And the goal in this process is to figure out how many of each color should be distributed in the different communities. So go ahead to the next slide. So as I said, Commerce provided 2 methods. The first, which was called Method A, keeps it pretty simple. And it says that each town should have the same share of orange houses and the same share of blue houses. And so even though the community on the top has fewer orange houses right now, and the community on the bottom has a lot in the future, when we look at the future need, it's just split equally between them. This is the method. Method A is the approach that was taken by Pierce and Kitsap County. You can see it's really pretty easy to understand. That's a big reason why folks landed on that one. Go ahead to the next slide. Method B takes another approach. And so it considers the housing that's already on the ground in each community and recognizes that there's an unequal distribution of the current housing stock and how it addresses different income levels. And so all 4 orange houses would go in the top community and 4 blue houses would go in the lower community. But in the end, when you look at the total amount of housing, then they have an equal split between them. And so this makes kind of a sense too. It accounts for what's on the ground. That was something that was identified by our group as being important to them. But what we saw when we talked with other communities is that no counties have chosen to use Method B. It is more complicated to explain. I won't get into it, but when you do the math on it, things go a little bit weird, and then you have to kind of correct for it in a weird way, and it's just not the easiest one to use. And so, go on to the next slide. We also looked at doing a hybrid approach, and this is where the group ultimately landed on their recommendation. Commerce does allow counties to develop their own approach, and both King and Snohomish counties adopted a hybrid approach. And those are ones that often, in the end, what we landed on looking at most closely is Snohomish County's method, which started with that method A in distributing the future housing need equally between different jurisdictions, but then takes another look and kind of redistributes things a little bit that gives some credit for the housing that's already on the ground. Go ahead to the next slide. And I kind of just said it before, but that's where we ended up. It's based on the Snohomish County method is the preferred allocation method. It's a hybrid approach. It starts with those equal allocations from method A, but then lowers allocations for jurisdictions that currently have a higher than average share of affordable housing. It also makes sure that all allocations, we avoid some of the more complicated math that would happen with method B, and it sums up and meets the requirement, which is that the total needs to add up to the total amount. So it checked all those boxes for our values. We thought the group found it to be the most fair approach that distributed affordable housing needs across communities, but also considered the differences among jurisdictions. It's relatively clear to explain, and it had agreement from all the partners. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Leonard to talk a little bit about Olympia's numbers.
Thanks so much, Allison. And I just reiterate, this was a unanimously accepted and recommended by all the staffs from all the cities, including the small towns who were represented as well. In the I don't know if that was mentioned earlier, but I just want to make sure that's really clear. So next slide. Thanks, Kelly. Just to start from the baseline, this is the city of Olympia and our urban growth area, the housing supply as of 2020. We were using that as kind of the baseline. So just so you know, we have a little over 25,000 housing units and about a little over 5,000 in the urban growth area. Next slide. And these are distributed like this in terms of the economic segments. As you can see, about half of Olympia's housing was affordable to residents 80% AMI or below. This is our largest share of housing is the 50 to 80%, and a little over almost 10,000 units. So, and this is, as we broke this out for all of the cities, this is kind of a similar pattern that the mid-range, if you will, the 50 to 80 and 80 to 100% was where most of the housing in our existing cities lands. Very little of it lands at below 50% or below 30%, excuse me. And that is, in fact, below 50%. We only had 11% in the city of Olympia of our housing is below 50%. And that's important as we get to what it looks like when we're projecting outward towards 2045. Go ahead, next slide, Kelly. So as we look ahead to between 2020 and 2045, our projected need is 12,644 units in the city, what's currently the city limits, and about 1,600 in the urban growth area, based on the projected population to go into those areas as well. And then next slide, that breaks out in a little different way in terms of what we need in terms of our housing going forward. And this, again, based on this hybrid approach, which has been somewhat adjusted for what's existing, the amount of additional housing to serve residents with incomes 80% AMI or lower is about 46%. So just a little bit lower than that proportion is right now in 2020. But the big change is below 50%, about 44% of new housing to be produced in the next 20 years will need to be below 50% AMI to meet these numbers. That's the challenge, not only facing Olympia, but facing, you can see in the countywide numbers, it's facing all the entire county and all its jurisdictions. We only have 11% of our existing housing in that below 50% AMI right now, or as of 2020, and we need to have 44% of our new housing to be in that category. So, of course, we also need to get the other 56% of housing above 80% as well. So there's quite a bit of housing that's needed there. And, as we know, all housing we need housing at all levels. But this particular challenge, I think, as we do our housing element in 2024, will be the below 50%. And if one more slide, please, Kelly. I just wanted to let you know again, remind you where we are on the comprehensive plan. I know the land use committee's seen this chart many times, but this is kind of our pathway forward on the comprehensive plan. And beginning basically next month, we're going to be launching on the housing element and beginning to work on that. So these numbers are sort of just in time for us to be doing that work. And we are currently discussing with the other jurisdictions and with TRPC staff to have a small contract to then take these numbers that have been produced out of this, if they're adopted by the Thurston Regional Planning Council, and then figure out how do we match that up with our zoning, with our land capacity and the buildable lands analysis, and just kind of do that number crunching to say, okay, do we have physically enough land in each of our zoning categories that would allow us to get to this housing? That's kind of our first next step. And then of course, all the policy decisions that go with that, especially how we can drastically increase the amount of housing at 50% or below of AMI. So big challenges ahead, but that's where we're headed with this process. And that's all we have for you today. If we can be ready for any questions you might have. There was a lot there, but hopefully that made sense. And I know Council Members Gilman and Madrone, we've talked about this as our TRPC representatives, so they may also be able to enlighten us a little bit on some of your questions.
Oh, sorry, that's right. If you can't, that's fine. I didn't spend enough time with that one that showed the needs across all of the cities. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. We can go on and do questions.
I was just wondering if Mayor Pro Tem or Councilmember Madrone has any comments from this process.
Well, first, I just want to underscore what Leonard and Allison said, that the smaller communities were involved at the table. And so there's agreement from the staff side going forward. And we had an initial presentation at the Regional Planning Council that the method and the allocation, I think are going to be pretty well accepted. And then the challenge comes in the implementation of how do we change rules and I'm going to go ahead and take a quick bite at the apple of the two questions I have. The first one is, and I brought it up in our conversation, it's about the allocation chart being broken into small sections up to the 50% mark and then a big lump on the right side. So I've had my second conversation this week where somebody has said, gosh, we need 16,000 market rate units and only 8,000 30 to 50,000. 30 to 50%. And so it's important to me that these bar graphs work better, but they don't have a number for those market rate units on them. But that our visual illustrations and our numbers don't accidentally misrepresent that there's a far greater need, that in fact it's about 40% that's the more expensive housing rather than the flip, of double the amount needed of the more expensive housing. So that's just
it's the
lighted parade coming back home.
Yeah,
my neighbors were texting, they were just going down our street. Yeah. So that I hope that we'll consider that it's that our graphics are going to really help shape this conversation. And then the second question I have is about whether we need 50% of the new units to be below 50% AMI, or we need that number of units between old and new stock to be rented at 50% or below, and that it could be that there'll be other policies besides creating the production of very low rent units that could help to create that balance.
I can answer that second question first, if that's okay. And Allison, correct me if I say anything incorrect here. But this is the need going forward from 2020. So it's all new housing units that we're projecting here on top of what's existing.
Right. So what I'm saying is there is no housing unit that has a fixed rent or mortgage amount.
Yes, they may
The
shift
values could
segments.
change over 20
Yes,
years.
they may shift
So,
income segments, and that's a good point, and that's going to be a real challenge to try to predict. But yes, that's a possibility and a likelihood actually that some of the housing will shift into different segments of, and there may be policies we can do to help support that. So if that's your point, I think that's a good one, because there's things we have not explored yet to try to help, if you will, sort of subsidize or encourage or incentivize some of the existing housing to move into a little bit lower cost range.
All right, there's two parts to that question. Did you get them both answered?
The other one was just sort of an observation that I think it's going to be important the way we graphically tell the story to help people think about this need.
I agree, and I think we can incorporate that into our presentations going forward.
All right, I've got Councilmember Parsley followed by Councilmember Cooper.
Mine's also sort of graphic. I read this report, and this actually helps quite a bit to understand what you landed on. I think it would be good to, while we're not required, but to make sure the numbers for the above 120 are on there, just so that people can see, sort of like a watermark, underneath your hash. And partly for what your very astute question was about, things are going to shift from market rate to 80 to 100 and then down. And also the knowledge that unless we build market rate housing, it's not going to free up some of the others.
All right, I've got Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Selby, and thanks a lot for this. It feels like it's a long time coming to get these numbers and be able to understand them by unit. So thanks for all the hard work at interjurisdictionally to bring them, because that's the challenge, right? Is getting to an agreed upon formula that 4 communities with vastly different housing stock can agree on. So the thing that stands out to me is not in the numbers of the units we need. It largely tracks where I think my gut was. But the fact that the financing systems in our state are not set up to be able to fund that sort of just above permanent supportive housing or just above subsidized up to 50 or so percent of AMI, and as we've seen in projects that have tried to come here, we don't have the dollars for the local match either. And so it's just, it kind of is so perfect for the state to say, you have to do this. And oh, by the way, none of the funding sources that we have can get you there outside of King, Pearson, Snohomish County, and maybe Spokane. And so is there a conversation about that at the statewide level? Because these are, I don't know if bunk's the word I want to use, but that it's hard to wrap your brain around getting anywhere if you can't build that level of housing in the numbers we need. And we all know the home fund won't even fund half of those permanent supportive housing units.
I think that's true, and that may have been partly rhetorical, but I don't think there's enough discussion going on at the state level. Darian can probably refer to some of the things that are being discussed, but I know you just approved your legislative agenda, but that's certainly where some of this action needs to happen to be able to get to those funding sources and make them more widely available.
If I could add to that, we're presenting this work to all the jurisdictions that are involved, and it's across the board, and we talked about it in the group. These are big numbers, especially for all of our communities and for our small communities. And there's a lot of, I think people understand the need and understand that we didn't have enough. We don't have enough affordable housing on the ground, but for many jurisdictions, how do we get to these numbers is a really difficult conversation. And so I think for those discussions, you will have partners out there who are facing the same struggle, and probably would be interested in making that case to the state about how to achieve these. How to meet the need that this process is. I think what it does is shed a better light on what that need is.
I really appreciate that, and just want to add one other thought is the the places where we have planned density that we're not getting it, how do we kickstart that or provide a different kind of, I mean, I think that's the policy conversation that'll be part of the comp plan, but how do we get the units out of the triangle in the first decade and not the latter decade, right? And I wish I knew that answer, but another rhetorical to pass it back to the mayor.
Thank you. I'm sure many of you have heard the term built for zero. Remember that big movement? And I remember thinking back, I forget which year it was, probably 17. It's like, well, that's what we need. And this is what I think of as built for zero. It's like we're building for the needs. Yep. And so it's really, really a great roadmap. And I understand we are going to have difficulties filling in that below 50% AMI. Absolutely. So, yeah, we'll keep legislating. So what is kind of not a gotcha question, but do you know what the current percentage projection is for us to grow over the next 20 years? Like the comp plan right now, the updates for another 20 years. So what's that projection for population for Olympia?
I want to say it was another 20,000 population over the next 20 years, roughly.
Right, but we don't have like a simple percentage. I could do that in my head, I guess.
Well,
30%?
as a percent of the current,
yeah,
55,000. I
Yeah.
can't do math in my head, but I'm looking at Aaron. Maybe he can.
Yeah, except when we did
I mean,
the
it's-
plan update last time, it was, oh, we're gonna grow 40% in the
Yeah,
next 20 years.
it's something like that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
we're still tracking still, because they're talking about the population, you talk about the schools, not,
Yeah, we've been on a basically a fairly straight growth line for a very, very long time, decades. I think that's right. It's been pretty steady.
yeah, a little under 2% a year. I looked it up on
Yep.
your website, but I was just trying to find that cumulative. Okay.
Okay, Mark's got a calculator. It's about just almost exactly 40%.
20% over the next 20 years. Okay, great. Thank you. That's helpful. All right. So any other questions before we move on? Since this is a briefing. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for your patience as well. All right. Okay. Yep. If anybody needs to take a comfort break, that's fine. Do you want? Do we want to pause for 5? Okay. We are going to take a 5-minute recess for a comfort break and we'll
below 50% AMI, and just talk about a meeting we had today or prepping for tomorrow with Commerce for Housing Trust Fund. And the county currently has about 200 units of 50% AMI and below units to be created into the Housing Trust Fund right now. 200 units ready to go. Commerce emailed us and said, I need the county to come together and rank them and tell us which ones you want us to fund, meaning that there will be one project coming out of Housing Trust Fund that is funded. So out of the 200 that we have in the pipeline that are ready to go, that have been worked on for the past year, has local match, some by our housing authority, we're going to be able to choose one, maybe two. So our community is hungry and ready and prepared to work to meet these unit numbers that we just saw, but the state financing and support just isn't there. And that's going to be compounded, especially for those PSH and 50% AMI units. So your instincts are spot on around needing state finance to fund the projects that we have in the pipeline. And those units that we saw are really our team's like North Star, like that is guiding our work moving forward. And I think of the Family Support Center project and how many hours and how much work we put into that. And that was 5 years of work, and it was 62 units. I mean, it feels like a drop in the bucket when you see these larger numbers, but that's just how much work it takes to build PSH and permanent support housing. And my last thing is I just want you to notice the slide I used, Mayor Sully. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Different photo than last time. Not getting roasted today. No way. On that. Yeah, on that. Okay. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so why are we here? We are here to talk about the multifamily tax exemption and some elements of it that we are looking to potentially change and why that is, and to hopefully improve the impact of the housing crisis in our community. We're here to consider the MFT as a policy and a way to address the unit counts that we need. We heard the unit count needed from Commerce and how we're addressing those just in the presentation before. And we feel the MFT is a piece of the puzzle that can help us address those units. And a review of the housing action plan is one of the top things identified in our housing action plan. A review of the MFTE was one of the top actions. And so we are here looking at the MFTE and seeing how it is valuable and continue to impact our community. Next slide. So now I'm going to hand it over to Leonard, and he's going to share some background and the intent of the MFTE.
Okay, thanks. Again, Leonard Bauer, Community Planning Development Director. It's always useful to go back and look at the intent and the original purpose for policy that you're considering changes to. So this is the state law, the revised Code of Washington 8414, that originally set up the multifamily tax exemption program, which is an option for communities, most communities, not over a certain size, but Olympia qualifies. And it has always been a multiple goal. So those words are right in the legislation. There are multiple goals for this program. And there's these 6 bullets basically summarize what those multiple goals are. And I won't read through all of them. Obviously, you have directed us to really focus a lot on increasing the affordable housing opportunities within the program. But there's also all these other goals, all of which we're working towards as part of this program. And the way this is applied and through that state law is that the local elected officials find that our urban centers are lacking sufficient housing based on what we have as our goals in the comp plan. We're not getting the housing we're planning for in these areas that we develop as target areas. So as you look at the areas tonight, we have recommended those based precisely on the 3 what we called high density neighborhoods in our comprehensive plan. And those have been in our comprehensive plan for several decades now. And we've had little to no housing in 2 of the 3, downtown being the exception, where we have had this program and a number of others to help as incentives for that. Next slide, please. So, and I know the lettering probably turned out way too small on this slide. I can see now. I apologize for that. But the policies that kind of support this go from our comprehensive plan, which specifically talked about concentrating housing to those 3 high density neighborhoods. That's where a lot of our growth is planned for. That includes the Capitol Mall, what we're calling now the Capitol Mall Triangle area, the downtown, and then the Lilly Martin Pacific Triangle. And these are the high density neighborhoods. And the whole idea being to create these neighborhoods that allow people to meet their daily needs without traveling outside their neighborhood, using walking, biking, rolling, methods rather than having to get in a vehicle to meet their needs. And specifically, the comprehensive plan said at least 1/4 of forecasted growth in our current comprehensive plan was planned for downtown Olympia. We are still on track to meet that goal in terms of new housing in downtown. We're not on track necessarily in these other high density neighborhoods. And then a policy specifically to provide incentives for housing in those districts, which are near transit stops and on our transit corridors. So that all ties together. Even since the comprehensive plan, our climate goals, it ties in with that as well. The downtown strategy specifically called for facilitating construction of new housing, and this again in the downtown, exploring additional incentives and tools. And then in the appendices, it referenced specifically a whole table or toolbox of development incentives, and found specifically that, and there was a feasibility study done as part of that downtown strategy, if you recall, that showed that concluded that the multifamily tax exemption program was one of the most powerful tools to incentivize housing development that we have. And then, as Darian mentioned earlier, the Housing Action Plan specifically called for expanding the multifamily tax exemption program to make it available in all transit corridors. And as a first step, to conduct feasibility analysis. As you know, we did that with Echo Northwest last year. Next slide. Just quick history. I'll go through this rather quickly, but the first legislation was authorized in 1995 at the state level. It was originally a 10-year exemption. Jumping down below, Olympia authorized it in 1997. In the first 9 years, we had 7 projects, 384 units under that 10-year program. Obviously, those have all expired at this point and are fully back on the tax rolls. So that 10-year exemption period is expired, and we have the property tax valuation fully on our tax rolls now. In 2007, the legislature reduced that market rate program to 8 years, added a 12-year low to moderate income housing option, which Olympia adopted in 2009. We didn't have any activity at that time, as you recall. That was the start of our recession, and until 2014, we didn't really have any activity. But since then we have, and I'll get that on the next slide. In 2021, there were additional changes to the multifamily tax exemption program to include a 20-year option that is part of this proposal tonight. Since 2014, we've had 15 projects, 13 of those 8-year projects, 2 of those 12-year projects, 704 total units by 7 different developers. And I'll just point out the 2 12-year projects is 86 units. So it's about 12% of the total units since 2014 have been in the 12-year program. Go ahead, next slide. And this kind of repeats what you just saw in the last presentation. Our total housing units we need. Getting that down to scale a little bit, we've over the last 4 or 5 years have permitted right around 350 housing units a year. It's actually been remarkably steady, which can be good and bad. We're maintaining, but we're not increasing the total number of units we've been building. We need to average 600 per year over the next 20 years to get to that goal of 12,644 units. So many of the actions you've taken in the last year or two will help with that, I believe. They're making it easier for housing builders and developers to look through and find parcels that might be more buildable for housing than they were previously before you made some of those adjustments. And next slide is just, again, that breakdown by units needed between 2020 and 2045 in each of the categories. This is a little different graphic than you saw earlier. Almost makes it more stark where those needs are. But it really helps kind of give us a picture of where we need to focus for the next 25 years to try to achieve these housing units. And with that, I think Aaron is next, so I'll turn the microphone over to him to talk about the fiscal evaluation.
Thanks, Leonard. Next one. And even the next one. Thanks. So I've been asked to come here today and kind of try to give some context about what does the shift mean to taxpayers. We've had a lot of conversation about the tax shift that comes with the MFTE, but wanted to start by just taking a step back. All of you will know this slide very well by now. We talk about it during the budget process a lot. Just a couple of items I wanted to talk about here. So state law restricts property tax growth to 1% or the IPD, which is ever less. And that 1% is for the district. And so when we're talking about property tax, especially during the budget process, we're really talking about the city as the property tax district. There's multiple districts within the city, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But so as we examine this, you'll see some districts have a much different assessed value than what you're used to seeing, the 11 billion and change, because these districts have different assessed values. So the responsibility of determining the assessed value is with the assessor. And unlike other taxes, the city council has the direct ability to select how much revenue they want to levy in property tax. There is a maximum. The 1% increase is the maximum you can increase the property tax, but there's no minimum. So that gives you the authority to really influence this tax, whereas we might budget a sales tax amount, but ultimately that's going to come down to purchases. So there is a little bit of a difference there. When we talk about property tax, we often talk about the levy rate, and that is a calculation which takes the revenue amount that the council decides, the assessed value from the assessor, and then also a variable of $1,000. So revenue divided by assessed value times 1,000 gets us to the levy rate. And that levy rate is then after we get through this gyration, you kind of get down to more of the straightforward math where you take your property valuation divided by 1,000 times the levy rate gets you your property tax. So again, when we talk about this, we often talk about the inverse relationship. As assessed value goes up, the rate goes down. And as assessed value goes down, the rate goes up. And you'll see that demonstrated in this presentation here. The next slide. So we don't often talk about this particular slide. Now, I will just add the information that we have in this presentation and in the financial part of the presentation all comes from the assessors. They put out every year, they put out the levy book. So we are using the 2023 levy book as we're in 2023, and we'll talk about that in a slide or two. But Olympia has 5 what's called tax code areas, and those designate a unique set of taxing districts. And so as you look down the list on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the City of Olympia regular levy, the City of Olympia bond levy. We often refer to it as the excess levy. And then you also can see about midway down the OMPD. And so those are the ones that we talk about during the budget process, because those are the ones that you have direct influence over. But in the taxing districts of the city, you have all these other districts that are included. So there are 5 taxing districts. The only difference in the 5 is the school rate. And in taxing district, I believe it's 114, the North Thurston, number 3, is in that taxing district. It's slightly different than the Olympia schools rate. And then 126 has the Tumwater School District. So when we add all of these up, the total taxing district and we're using taxing district 110 as the example here, is $9 and almost 96 cents per $1,000 of assessed valuation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've been talking about this difference between a tax shift and a deferral quite a lot. And there's been some confusion. I think Mayor Pro Tem and I were reading some of the same articles when we were researching this. State law allows for districts to shift the tax burden of MFTE exempt properties to other property owners in the district. We met with the assessor, we met with Department of Revenue, and there is not a deferral that exists. There was confusion within the Department of Revenue itself, and that led to kind of this larger confusion. There's alignment now that there is not the possibility of deferral, only through a tax shift. And the law was set up this way to help ensure that actions taken by the Olympia City Council on an MFT exemption don't impact the revenues of those other taxing districts that are part of the city. And one of the things the assessor said was just that due to the certification schedule of the assessed valuation and all of the factors, approvals of MFTE applications in the spring allow the city to receive the full value of that new construction in that year, and then they would be on the exempt list for the next year moving forward. Next slide. So just want to mention a few caveats to the slides that are coming up. And the first one is that we use the 2023 levy information. We wanted to look at a way that we could do some sort of forecast. Exceptionally difficult when it comes to assessed valuation for a variety of reasons. Most notably is we talked about that the revenue is limited to 1% on a district. That doesn't mean that every property in the district has the same increase in assessed value and a 1% increase in tax payable. They take the whole district wide. So to select particular properties to say, well, this one's going to go up by 4%, and we think this will go up by 6%, and this one by 7%. It's just almost impossible. Well, it is impossible to do. And so we would just be using assumption after assumption after assumption. So we wanted to stick with what we can concretely look at and say, here is what it is. There's also a part of the issues are that MFT exemptions, they're dependent on the planned use of the improvement. So you may have a building that is an MFT exception, but if it has a retail center at the bottom, that's not exempt from MFTE. And so that has to be taken into account as they go through, as the assessor goes through the assessed value of that. So again, these are just reasons that we use known data that everyone can go back to the levy book on the assessor website and see where we're coming from that data. The other thing that we did on the slides is the impact that we are using are the decisions that the city council has made on MFT, on multifamily exemptions. So we did not look at what did the county do and how does that impact the county and all of that, because we don't have any control over those. Those are outside of our control. So we're using the city MFTE when we look at the numbers moving forward and the impacts. Next. So this slide was provided to us by the housing team, and it's a great slide showing our active multifamily exemptions for 2023. Couple of things I want to mention, fourth column over where it says 2022 assessed value. We talk about this during our budget process. So in 2023, for the most recent budget process that we went through, we talk about the assessed value in 2023 for 2024 collections. So obviously this is the 2022 for which were collections in 2023. And it provides the name of the project, the housing units, the parcel numbers, the assessed value of the property, and then the MFTE exempted value of it, and then the taxable value. The taxable value is still being taxed, and that tax is still being collected at the rate. So at this, for 2023, we have about 184 million rounded up of exempted assessed values. The chart also shows that the Franklin lofts, this is the last year of the exemption, so that will fall off. That will be added, that exemption amount will be added back to the rolls. But now in the interim, we might have new properties come on. And that was another decision point on why we just stuck with 2023, because we won't necessarily know what those assessed values are. So just wanted to provide that for context. So as we go through this, you'll see this $183 million number throughout. So we broke the impacts into two pieces. One piece is the city impacts, which are the regular levy, the OMPD, and our excess levy. And then we have another slide which shows the impact of that total district of the tax code area. So what we're showing here, I'm just going to use the top one as the example. The math works the same all the way down. But for our regular levy, our assessed value in 2023 was almost $11.7 billion. The amount of property tax that was adopted by council, which is the limit of 1%, plus any of the new construction refunds and all of those types of things that are above the 1%, was nearly $20.4 million. If you take the revenue divided by the assessed value times 1,000, you come to the levy rate of $1.74. So for the city's regular property tax, all of the properties pay $1.74 per $1,000 of their assessed valuation to the city. The next column over, where it shows no exemption, we do the same thing, except we add the $183 million into that 11.6. And we're eliminating that exemption of assessed value, which increases the assessed value, which forces the rate down. And that's why you see the difference between $1.74 in the first column and $1.71 in the second column. That's the difference of the exemption. As assessed values go up, the rate gets forced down, because we're still going to collect $20,357,000, and we just need a lower rate to do it with a higher AV. So as we go through this, and the rest of these, as I said, works exactly the same way. The exemption, the including exemption total levy for these three property taxes is just over $2.29 per $1,000. And if we don't include the exemptions, or if those exemptions are excluded, it would lower the rate to about $2 and almost 26 cents. So it's about 3.5 cents different per $1,000 by having the exemptions in or out of that. Yeah, next slide. So again, just looking at the city levies.
Can I just clarify? 3.5 cents. That's what you said, the difference.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, per thousand. Thank you.
Yes, about 3.5 cents, right.
Aaron, so you said added back to the rolls, but earlier you said there is no opportunity to defer. It's all on the rolls. That's why I'm not understanding this 3.5% calculation. Maybe help me out. If I thought the difference was that we didn't send the tax bill to the exempted properties and everybody else made up that difference, which is different from exempting the properties.
Right. So what ends up happening is when, how do I say this? Can we go back maybe 2 slides to one more? Yeah, to this slide. Hopefully this will be able to give some context. So what happens is property in, I would just use as an example, Merritt Manor property. The assessed value of that property is $24 million. There's an exemption of 22 million. And so that exempted property tax, that 22 million will not be billed to the property owners. And that's what will be collected or collectively shifted to all the others. And so what that does effectively is it reduces the assessed value of the amount that we are shifting, the total assessed value, and we're shifting some of that to the other property owners. That's what we're trying to demonstrate here. So that is the impact. That's the amount that the shift that the other property owners are picking up is $22 million that would have gone to that's being shifted out. And if we take those exemptions out, it would effectively put $183 million back on the assessed value that people would not be shifted to. And that's what we're trying to demonstrate. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, forward 2 if you can. Perfect. So this slide again, just using the city's levy, and again using the exemption. The top half is the rate with the exemption, which is higher than the bottom half, which is what it would be. The rate would be if there was no exemption. And what we've done here is we've shown the numbers as a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, and $600,000 property. I'm just going to use a $300,000 property as the example here. The math works the same. You take 300,000, you divide by 1,000, and you get 300. You multiply that by the levy rate of $2.29, and you come up with $687. On the other side, where there would be a little bit of a lower rate, it would be $677. So for that property, just on the city levies, it would be about a $10 difference, $11 difference. Thanks. Perfect. Per year, annually. Yes, per year. This slide then really functionally does the same thing as that we just looked at. We've taken the tax code and we've put the 2023 AVs with the exemption, those amounts that are in there, and you'll be familiar with the 11.688 million. And then the amount of revenue levied, and then that calculates to the rate that we've been talking about if we take the first line there. And that's the same as it goes all the way down. Just shaded the city levies, the OMPD, the excess, and the regular city levy in gray to differentiate those. And then we put that 183, effectively put that 183 back in, and it would shift that rate slightly down to the $1.74, or sorry, to the $1.71, and then all the way down, and it totally shifts the 996 almost down to about 986. And again, all of these numbers in the first 3 columns are in the levy book that you can get on the assessor's website. And then again, it shows the inverse relationship. As assessed values increase, the rate comes down, and you can see that across the board there. So then when we get to the final slide for me anyway, same math as we showed with the city levies, in that we're taking the $300,000 through $600,000 assessed value property. You divide by 1,000. So on the 300,000, you divide by 1,000, you get 300. You multiply that by the roughly $9.96, and your annual property tax impact would be almost $3,000 if we functionally took the exemption out and added that back in so that everybody was paying their full freight. It would be about $9.86, and that would be about $2,960. So you can see it's almost a $30 difference annually on a $300,000 property. We then demonstrated this as an 8-year exemption at 2023 levels and a 12-year, and you can see what that does over that period of time. It's just simply taking the $30 times 8 and the $30 times 12. Those amounts really aren't, it's just demonstrative, because the 2023 amounts aren't locked in for 8 years and locked in for 12 years. There's a rolling scale there, but we just wanted to show, again, using the impact for 2023. So using known numbers is is fairly easy to kind of come up with these calculations, and it's easy to show comparatively. So this is something that we could do year over year over year and say, what was the impact in one given year based on the exemptions functionally and the impact of the tax shift? That's what I have.
Thank you. I'm sure other people have questions. Maybe I should wait, but so these numbers are just for Olympia residents? Or is this countywide?
This is for Olympia residents. This is for the Olympia tax code that includes Olympia, Medic One, school districts, state schools, all of those that was on the previous slide, but it is for the city of Olympia. Yes.
But the tax shift is throughout the county? No.
Yeah, functionally, because the $183 million we have exempted, any district that is also includes the city also gets to shift to that tax so that they can collect their full revenue and they aren't constrained on their revenue side by the actions of the city council to exempt properties.
Okay. So if somebody lives in the UGA of Olympia still pays that extra $28 a year?
That's right.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Gilman, followed by Councilmember Cooper.
So in the work to understand this potential expansion, there was hope of having the program scale up. And I'm wondering how this calculation against the 1% plus the value of new construction that you're talking about, how this modifies it. If the program scaled up, would it be a linear effect, or would it go off in some other direction? Would it scale if it was 10 times this? Would it be 90 cents instead of 9 cents, or would it be some other number?
Well, yeah, it would be a larger number. I don't know if it would be exactly because just because of that work. I don't want to say, yeah, if it was 90% higher, it would be 90 cents higher. But to the root of the question, I think is as the program scales up, and if we add more exemptions, that 183 becomes 250 hypothetically. And that is still shifted out. So the functional rate that is property taxpayers are paying would be higher by another, what is that, $70 million worth than what it would be if the exemption did not exist. I hope that gets to your question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just thinking this is a lot to think about. It's my first time getting this presentation. Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Selby. Aaron, just to clarify, is your 8 and 12-year calculation, do you assume 1% each year in that number, or is it just the 8?
It's just straight math.
Straight math with no increase.
That's
okay.
Right. Just
Thank
straight
you.
Math off of this.
Okay, and I had another question that has, I like how you implied keeping this going into the future so we can keep real-time data. In that, could we get to, and maybe this is a daring question for later, that's fine if it's not you, but could we get to a point where we're able to show this work by the unit types that we looked at in the previous presentation? Like the income scale levels. And I realize now that I'm very much confusing two things. So it's just because I'm tired. So I'll save that question for later.
All right, Councilmember Parsley.
This is more of a comment than a question, but also maybe making sure I'm thinking about this right. But your 8-year and 12-year assumption, when I was looking at the properties that would all of a sudden start paying taxes, it ranges from 23 to 2035. So that number is assuming that none of them are going to have to pay taxes during that time. Because that number is really fluid is where I'm going.
And that's correct. And that's why we just had to pick a point in time.
Right.
And that's what we did. So we used 2023 as the known amounts.
Right.
Yeah. And it will change every year.
and then some of these buildings that are now going to be paying taxes. So to go to Mayor Pro Tem's, if we expand, as we expand, others are going to fall off and start paying taxes as we move forward.
That's right. It's just kind of a conveyor belt. Yeah.
All right, we ready to move on? Think so. Real quick though, can we open these doors? It's just really hot and stuffy in here. Thank you. We'll get some, yeah, thank you. Sure.
While we're opening the doors, I just, Councilmember Parsley, I just want to explain that by expanding, I meant increasing the number of projects. So it's true that projects will finish the exemption and fall off, but I'm talking about as we expand geographically and we expand the duration, actually having a larger program of new projects and projects falling off. So that's how I differentiate that.
Oh, I agree. But my comment about expansion is that it won't be linear either, because we will always be losing some off that. And a 2-year lag time from getting funding and building and actually paying taxes. And we're looking several years into the future to have a significant number increase.
All right, I think we're ready. Thank you.
Right. And there'll be development just outside of that will increase all of our properties and also shift taxes to that. So like Erin said, it'll continue to fluctuate. Anyway, back to housing. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Okay. So with this tax information and with the goals of the units that we're looking to address and how we want to shift the MFTE, the goals of the review with Echo Northwest, we were propelled through the Housing Action Plan. We were hoping to take the MFTE and improve the 12-year. There was a lot of press from the community to better look at the 12-year to see how we could advance that from moving forward. Like Leonard said, we have 2 projects. It does consist of 11% of the units, but how can we make the 12-year more appealing and robust and fold into all the rest of the city's incentives? And really just position the MFTE to address affordable housing as a whole, and then better incentivize development in all of our high density areas to align better with the comprehensive plan, and then just to stimulate more housing altogether. Next slide. So 2 pieces I want to highlight, and I brought up before, and I'm sure you all heard during the Martin Way Corridor study and the Capital Mall Triangle study, is when they factor in housing and lay out goals for housing density in both of these areas, they both consider the MFT as baseline. So when they project, like in the Capital Mall Triangle, we need between 1,500 and 3,000 units, that is saying baseline with the MFT as the exemption. And we're going to have to work to stack our incentives and our creativity to achieve that unit count with seeing that the MFT as the baseline. And so both of the consultants consider the MFT in their projections for their housing unit. And we're going to have to do more to build the density in both of those areas that we'll want to see. Next slide. So I want to talk about community benefit all together. I think it highlights with the tax shift, we're seeing residents pay for the incentive or for the exemption. And what is their benefit? What are they reaping when we are seeing the exemption for these large developments? And of course, it's housing. Of course, we're seeing more housing. That is the visible piece. And we need that. We need to be able to increase our supply so the demand isn't tight. Working at the city, I haven't seen a larger than 3% occupancy rate, and that is really strapped even by HUD's projections. So we need to be creative around supply, and that is the community benefit when we look at this tax shift and how our residents are benefiting. Our improved density altogether, that is a key element in our comprehensive plan, is that we need to identify urban hubs or urban centers that we want to densify, and then use our policies and practices to densify these areas outlined in the comprehensive plan. All of our climate goals are really targeted around transportation. How can we incentivize, make places more multimodal, make communities have the things that they need in a 10-minute accessible area? And we'll be able to do that by addressing density. And this also prevents urban sprawl. And this seeing our 3 areas and then looking to expand to our urban centers is a way that we can really best utilize the MFTE. And then, building more transit hubs and being able to support our nonprofit developers, meeting with Habitat and how to package the Boulevard project. This is something, right now they have an $11 million request into the Housing Trust Fund. The Housing Trust Fund has a $5 million cap and they requested 11. And so how we fill a $6 million cap when I've already submitted a CHIP fund application. They've come into the home fund. They had the land for free. They're looking at tax credits. Like, this is now a project similar to a family support center that has, is going to have upwards of 10 different funding sources. So expanding the zone of the MFTE will allow them to capitalize on the 20-year exemption for their Boulevard project. Next slide. So I just again want to walk through how we got here and the backup information that has stacked up to bring us to the staff recommendations. We had the Echo Northwest study that was presented to you all in December of 2022. Taking that and coupling it with the MFT focus group that I served on in all of 2022 and hearing how other jurisdictions are grappling with this affordability piece, with density, with housing stock altogether, with understanding that there's sometimes friction with the exemption. I'm seeing a lot of similar rhetoric coming out of neighboring communities. And so a lot of the recommendations before you are what other communities are doing in Tacoma, Vancouver, and Redmond, very similar programs to meet that friction point and to also address the need in the community. Next slide. So I'm going to go over the program recommendations, and those areas are in the boundary expansion, the requirements, and then the additional pieces that were recommended by land use. Next slide. So here's the current boundary, again, a little bit in the west side, the downtown, and then down Martin Way, but really focused on the downtown. And then you go to the next slide. And then here's the proposed boundary all around the Capitol Mall triangle in the downtown, and then the expansion to east side with those 4 stars talking about the neighborhood centers and how the proposal is to expand to those areas. And that bottom star right there is the Habitat Boulevard project. So they would be able to take advantage of the exemption in that area. Next slide. So we're hoping to position the MFT again as looking to target affordable housing. We want to lead with the 12-year and show how we can stack our incentives, incentivize developers, and be able to position themselves where all of the units would be 80% or below AMI. This aligns with all of the city's incentives around impact fees, the lot program we have set up. We're looking to expand supports around EV charging development. And all of that is 100% of the units at 80% AMI. So if we can fold the MFT into that, then we feel we'll be able to package more development and entice developers to focus in the areas in the map before and have additional 12-year projects. In the 8-year, taking the projects that happen in Olympia and still being able to support the home fund and additional projects moving forward, flexible funding that we could be that local match for 4% LIHTC projects. We could use for land banking. We could move forward other elements of our housing action plan if we had more flexible funding. And so we see that opening up with the fee and lieu setup with the 8-year. And that would be 5% of the exemption in the downtown and in the east side, and 25% of the exemption in the west side. And again, those percentages are different because of housing development and how much rent costs. So because rent is higher in the west side, it's still feasible to develop at that rate with a 25% fee in lieu as opposed to the downtown or the east side. And those funds would come back into the home fund and be flexible for council discretion, land banking, 4% match, etc. And then the application fee, this is just highlighting again that our application fee was the lowest in the state, kudos. And now we're bringing it up to better match staff investment to $1,000 plus $75 per unit up to $5,000. So scaling up depending on the size of the project. Yeah, go ahead.
A quick clarification. That application fee was in one of the budget ordinances you took action on in your consent calendar, so that you've already taken action on that application fee. just to be clear.
Wonderful. Count that as a W. Okay, and then again, hearing this more and more, improved communications and marketing around the MFT. It's been an incredibly passive program. It was handed off to me as a passive program. Our performance measures, our communications, our whole story around the MFT has been pretty lax, and we are really prepared to make that look different in 2024. Even using the tax shift information and having it on our website, just being more knowledgeable about the exemption altogether. Being on the statewide focus group has been a huge benefit to me, and having colleagues in other jurisdictions grapple with pieces and how they're able to position projects better, or just developers in other jurisdictions that are taking advantage of the exemption and can hopefully fold into our 12-year exemption. So yeah, we're really looking to make this more accessible and communicate better benchmarks to the community. Next slide. And then some other additions that we have added per land uses suggestions and other learnings that we've heard from other jurisdictions is adding a 5-year extended contract to all of our 12-year projects. And with that extended contract, that would address increase steep rent increases. So only allowing a 7% increase per year for the next 5 years. That way, when that 12-year exemption ends and it's at 80% AMI, the property manager couldn't go up 20% rent increase and then see folks displaced. So we're only allowing a 7% rent increase for the next 5 years with 12-year projects. For the tenant opportunity to purchase element, we're getting a lot of traction with that with our current housing study. We're seeing some really good TOPA examples and hoping to see where we could add that as a requirement into the MFTE that says, great, you received the exemption, you've paid your fee in lieu, and there's this TOPA element that when you go to sell, you have to go to the residents first. And if they're able to purchase within a 6-month period, then it needs to go to them first. If they're not, it can go to your other selling mechanisms, but it needs to go to the residents first. So we're seeing some cool examples of that throughout the country, and we're hoping to see how we can come back to you all and talk about how we can integrate that into the MFTE. And then the 20-year exemption, which I've talked about already, focused on home ownership. It has to be by a nonprofit developer and in specific geographies. So it's a little more specific, but putting it in our ordinance, I think, will allow for some traction. And then just clear performance measures, and then coming back to you all every 5 years to talk about what we've learned, what we want to improve, and then just suggestions from the council. Next slide. Okay. Next steps is to hear from you all tonight if you're looking to adopt the proposed ordinances and then better incorporate the MFT into the affordable housing development incentives, and then come back to land use and talk about how we're doing. That's what I got.
All right, so now it's time for us to discuss amongst ourselves and ask you questions. All right. So, yeah, Councilmember Madrone.
Chair land use, so wanted to speak to
I
it.
just didn't see a big question slides. It's questions.
Oh yeah.
Like,
And it's so weird to like not be at the curved
I know,
table.
I can't
Hold
see
on.
it. It's really hard. Yes, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
There you go.
That's better.
Just reorient myself here. Now I can see most of you. Yes, this has come through the Land Use and Environment Committee. And I want to acknowledge that there was not unanimous support for this proposal. And I believe we will hear that dissenting opinion from Mayor Pro Tem Gilman. And one thing that I want us all to keep in mind is that our staff, who are working tirelessly to solve our housing crisis in Olympia, are bringing this to us as part of a solution for the housing issues in our community. It's not the only tool in our toolbox. And I have full confidence that they would not bring us a proposal that will erode all our other efforts to meet the broad needs that we see in the community. It's a piece of a complicated puzzle to help address the full range of our housing issues. And I'll admit, I initially had a lot of reservations, concerns, questions about the MFTE. Just ask our staff over there. We've met numerous times over the past year plus on this issue. And as I looked into what other cities have done to achieve different outcomes for their housing programs, one thing that I looked at was Seattle's mandatory housing affordability program, and was wondering, well, how did they arrive at that? And as I did a little bit deeper dig, I learned that they started with an economic analysis. You know, how much could they require developers to contribute to affordable housing before it leads to no new housing at all? And that's how they developed their program, and it's a similar approach that we've taken here. I've heard some folks advocating that the MFTE only support projects that incorporate affordable units as an inclusionary zoning model, and this is a very market dependent strategy. It's only successful when the housing market is strong. If you do all sorts of research around inclusionary zoning, even the biggest advocates will say, and here's a caveat, like if your market's not strong enough, it's not going to work and you won't see any new housing. And Olympia is not there yet. And yes, you know, for 8 years, the property taxes for the residential portions, so not the land, not any commercial, talk with my hands, not any commercial components of the building, but the residential portions are shifted to others. We saw that presentation from Aaron. But they do end up supporting the whole community with the tax revenue that they bring in over the life of the building. So, you know, if I don't know if any of you are familiar with Urban 3, it's a really nerdy data analysis, a group that will look at cities and show where tax revenue is coming in and where it's going out. And every single city that they have looked at shows that the dense urban areas where there's high concentrations of residential and commercial development brings in lots of revenue, but they don't see the same return. It's spread throughout the whole community. And I really wanted us to do that here, but you know, staff are busy. And we can see that with data through our assessor's office. The property values are higher in our downtown area, West Side Triangle, all of that. And we, as a council, we spread that revenue throughout the community. So this is revenue that for the life of the project is going to pay into local services, plus the general fund for the city, and it's going to help pay for needs across the whole city over the life of the project. And we know that the further away you get from the urban core, the more investments are needed per capita to maintain infrastructure and, you know, other city services. You know, the trash truck has to drive further, sidewalks and streets are longer and they serve less people, et cetera. So after the 8-year tax exemption is complete, these projects will pay a disproportional rate than the services they will receive from the revenue they provide. So these higher value properties end up subsidizing the rest of the community over time. And this doesn't include the sales tax that would be generated by online shopping of a concentrated population in a building. So sales tax is another source of revenue that is not even part of that equation that I mentioned. But on top of that, and you know, Darian had a slide on this, but dense urban housing has community-wide benefits. Staff have already presented tonight around the need for housing at all levels, including those who are at or above area median income. But the MFT is not just a housing program. It's also a program that supports environmental and climate change initiatives. Urban density has unquantifiable benefits that support everyone in our community. We'll have reduced energy and water usage per capita, reduced vehicle miles traveled, more demand and support for transit services, and reduced pressure to develop rural farms and forests in our region. And also, you know, Olympia has a very proactive strategy for affordable housing that will support housing needs for all people in our community. We're doing it all. This isn't the only thing that we're doing. You know, and actually, you know, this program will also help with the affordable housing. We heard from Habitat for Humanity that they would really like to be able to use this program. And our staff have been so successful in partnering with community organizations to get affordable housing built. And so with all of our tools in the toolbox, including the MFTE, we're going to make meaningful progress on our housing goals. And I just wanted to know, I did look at, you know, what's for rent right now downtown in these new buildings. Studios are going for $1,250 to $1,325 a month. I know they're small, but it's housing. And that is affordable for those making 50 to 53,000 a year. One bedroom, 1,500 to 1,650, affordable to 60 to 66,000 a year. And two bedrooms, 895 to 2025. So that's affordable for 76,000 to 81,000 a year. So this is workforce housing, and all of these numbers, that's below that 100% AMI for households of 1 to 2 people. So I just wanted to share those for context. That's the extent of my comments.
Thank you. Yeah. Point, counterpoint. Mayor
Yeah,
Pro
there we
Tem.
May I ask a question first? Or did we just want to like get to, because we could also make a motion and I could speak on the motion, but I had a question. I don't know if there's any other questions that, just, you described MFTE as being baseline for the Martin Way corridor study and the Capitol Mall Triangle study. And I'm wondering how that contrasts with the North Lacey, South Tumwater, and around Capitol Medical Center development of apartment complexes without tax exemption incentive right now. I'm just curious why it's baseline. Please, yeah.
I'll take a shot. That's probably not possible to answer completely, but with those two studies, there was a market analysis as part of them. Different consultant than Echo Northwest that looked at what it would take to attract the types of development and the amount of development that we're looking for in those areas, and they assumed the multifamily tax exemption. When we say baseline, I think what Darren is referring to is they made the assumption the multifamily tax exemption was there, and that was a part of their analysis. So assuming developers used that, there was still other assistance needed in those areas, given the rents that were achievable in those areas at the time they did the analysis. So when we say baseline, we just say they made the assumption that was in there, and it still was needed to even do more to get to some of the levels of development. Now, it is true. Obviously, we've had development, multifamily development in other parts of the city. So is Lacey, so is Tumwater. Not every area is the same. One thing we've learned from these 3 market studies is it's very different. That's why we're proposing a 25% fee in the west side. The achievable rents there are higher, and so there's a higher amount of fee that can be, charged, if you will, and still leave those developments being feasible. And that's different than downtown and east side where the rents aren't as high. And when we say rents, that's not necessarily what an individual would pay, but it's what the development can achieve in terms of revenues. And I don't know what those are in Lacey and Tumwater. They may be higher or lower, but I'm guaranteed they're different. And so that's probably what accounts for some of that. Development happens on property that's, it depends on the cost of the property, depends on the cost of development. We all know downtown development is way more expensive, almost exponentially more expensive than development in Lacey and Tumwater, where the soils are solid and perk pretty well. And so there's a lot of differences in costs as well in terms of development. So those are factors involved in the answer to your question. They're not really an answer, I know, but those are factors I'm sure that are part of that.
I appreciate that, Leonard. And do you want me to go ahead and speak my concerns about the program now?
Thanks for bringing up the question. I do have one, and then
I have one.
Okay, let's finish up some questions. We've been sitting with this for a minute. So I was surprised because again, I wasn't privy to a lot of this. I wasn't following this as closely as some other people until recently, and I was surprised when we last found out that the neighborhood centers from the 2014 comp plan were included in the MFTE areas. And so if when I think of multifamily housing up against single family homes, like right up against single family homes, it seems out of scale. And I know we talked in the comp plan about buffering around single family neighborhoods. So what's the height limit on these zones?
So the 4 that are proposed are the only 4 of the neighborhood centers that have any multifamily zoning at all. And so that's why they're included. Our other neighborhood centers don't have multifamily zoning. they have either neighborhood commercial or single family, but not, or low density, I should say. The multifamily zoning, and I'm trying to recall off the top of my head, but I believe in 3 of those centers, it's actually our lowest multifamily zone, if you will, the 6 to 12 density. So that would be, and the height limit, I don't recall. I mean, we can find out all of this for you, but it's a much less dense than, say, the downtown or these 3 high density nodes where, we have like an 85-foot height limit and, no maximum density. So these would be either the 6 to 12, and I believe where the Boulevard Road is I believe it's in the 13 to 18 density range.
Yeah, that one isn't,
So,
that's more isolated
yeah.
from single family homes. And I just
Generally,
remember us
yeah.
trying not to allow towers next to somebody so they blocks the sun for.
And we also
housing
have this would be more applicable along the transit corridors, but we also have a step down sort of ordinance
Yes.
for where you're adjacent to the lower density.
Yeah. Yeah, I just remember
So
working
that's
on
in
that,
place
so-
as well in most of these areas.
Okay.
Could I add something?
Sure.
We're not changing, correct me if I'm wrong, we're not changing the zoning code or the design standards, like the housing that could be built with the MFTE. Yeah, we've already made those changes. And the smallest MFTE project can be 4 units. Yeah.
Thank you. That's what I needed to know. So, thank you. So, Councilmember Parsley.
Thank you for answering my other question earlier, Darian. This one is, I keep getting hung up on it, and it may be my dyslexia, but on the 20-year program, it says 25% of the units are sold as permanently affordable with those who are 80% and under. Does that mean that 75% could still be like rental units? I'm just trying to make sure I got that in my head.
No, this is 100% of the units are to own, but only 25% have to be sold to folks who are 80% AMI or below. And that is directly state code for the 20-year. That's brand new just in 2021. So we haven't been able to see its success, if it's been changed, if it's really taken off at all, because it's so new. So we just took exactly what the state is doing around home ownership. We're going to let it play out and then can manipulate it as we need. But yeah, that's 25% of the produced units. So if there's 4 home ownership units, 1 unit is sold to someone at 80% AMI of permanent affordability.
Is that, I'm assuming that's to allow, like they're doing in Portland, where they're allowing some of these nonprofits to be able to use market rate housing to fund some of the.
Exactly.
Yes, thank you.
And it has to be done by a nonprofit.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, so Mayor Pro Tem, your time.
Sure.
No.
I know, Robert's rules and all that. I'm going to go ahead and speak on the motion that's going to be made in opposition to the motion that's going to be made. So I share a vision with you, and I think with many people in town, that we want Olympia to have enough housing, resources, and opportunities for every person who lives here, and that our government is an advocate for the people who live and visit Olympia, and that our city continues to be willingly funded by people who trust their money will be used for the greatest good for the greatest number, and to focus on those who have the greatest need. I don't believe that this expansion of the multifamily tax exemption fits that shared vision. First, just because it shifts the developer's property tax for new apartments onto everybody else's tax bills. It's when we're proposing an expansion tonight, we're forcing taxpayers to hold a blank check because we don't know how much the program will grow or cost. We're talking about 3,000 potential new units in the Capitol Mall Triangle compared to the 500 to 700 units that we've been running with these downtown projects. And most of the benefits will go to those who least need the help with housing, with the 8-year program. So I think that there's ways to create a more fair program that makes bigger impact and is more likely to show measurable success. I mean, just bottom line, I think given the limited staff time and money that the city has to put into housing efforts, that aiming at housing that's most difficult to build, rather than trying to follow this all housing is good housing. So let's put our treasure and talents into trying to incentivize market rate apartments is just a missed opportunity. And I think about all this in the context of we're trying to erase historic economic and racial divisions in the community. And that's an intentional effort across many departments in the city. And I hope that our housing efforts will also specifically focus on how do we erase those challenges. And the other thing I want to speak to is about who can help shape this, because frankly, there have been several community voices who have really helped our understanding on this topic of tax exemptions for developers of housing. And among those voices, I say especially Dan Leahy and Larry Jezza got a raft of garbage from us over the years, were debated at meetings, and actually provided valuable insights into how the program really works, including leading to the clarification meetings that Aaron and I were able to attend with Department of Revenue as they met with Commerce to better understand a mechanism that we've just been promoting inaccurately and understanding it not the right way for years. They also provided us accurate estimates. Actually, now that Aaron's got his estimates, their estimates were very similar all along. So I want to just give a plug for us respecting and listening to the community members who come and bring their expertise. You know, folks who are former elected officials themselves, have advanced degrees and professional work in these areas, teach the new generation of bureaucrats at the MPA program at Evergreen, right? It's frustrating to have their credentials or their calculations just questioned on the face. It's really frustrating to me. So I hope that we'll take our comp plan vision that says through collaborative and open discussions, Olympians embrace a shared responsibility to make our community a better place. I hope we take that to heart as we move forward. And I'm hopeful that as time goes along, that this expansion, this program will morph into new programs and policies that insist on long-term affordability, insist on an integration across income levels within a multifamily building, and require greater transparency and reporting out of the costs and the impacts of the programs. So I look forward to continuing this work. I care a lot about housing and development in our town. And I appreciate your considering that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for bringing that perspective. And I really, really am thankful for you noting that we have so many smart people in our community that bring things to us. And sometimes, you know, it can seem a little bombastic at times. And so sometimes, you know, the way it's brought sometimes makes you want to push away from it. But if you can get past that, yeah, they bring some really, really amazing knowledge our way. And so thanks for recognizing that. Councilmember Madrone, followed by Councilmember Cooper.
Oh, I was going to see if we were ready for a motion, but I also wanted to see if Dante had anything to say.
Yeah. Councilmember Payne, do you have anything to say?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay, you bet.
Oh, okay. I move to approve on first reading and forward to second reading an ordinance amending the municipal code chapter 5.86 related to the multifamily tax exemption.
All right. Does anybody want to speak to the motion? Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Selby. And I'll just mostly say I agree with Councilmember Madrone, and it's been a really good conversation. But I do want to lift up a few things that the Mayor Pro Tem stated. And, you know, the last one and the one that is really clear in the presentation is we still have to establish the long-term performance measures for this program. And so to me, that is still the thing I'm waiting for to know when to turn the dial down, because I do think at some point in the future, though,
much farther tonight in the future than I thought, based on the previous presentation. We hopefully will be able to not need those incentives because the market is producing. We've heard from a lot of members of the public. You mentioned a couple, and we are really lucky in our community. I just realized, oh no, they got me on the camera. We're really lucky in our community to have that expertise, and it's because even though we don't always agree, it's because of those conversations, the analysis, even the presentation that make us think and improve the final product. And so this is a huge amount of staff work, a lot of confusion around the shift, a lot of conversations, and I think success is in the final product, up to and including getting the county assessor summarized in one slide. I mean, that is significant to me, and how complex land. That wasn't about the human being. That was about the complexity of taxing.
Noted.
But it's funny nonetheless. And just to say it right back to you, Mayor Pro Tem, this is a better product because you were on the land use committee with us. Because if we had had 3 people that were in agreement, I don't think that we would have the product that we have in front of us today. So while I know you don't like it that much, I appreciate you for it.
All right, Councilmember Parsley, speaking to the motion.
Speaking to the motion, I got the chance to participate in some early conversations about the multifamily tax exemption when I was on land use. Seems like years ago. There's a pandemic between that time and now, so it seems like a decade in my brain. I will not lie. I wish we could have had the 8-year become something like an 80% to 120% and build out that. But looking at the numbers tonight that TRPC brought, I don't know that we need that. And I'm struck with a couple things. I'm glad, one, thank you, Larry, and all the others for making us really look at the true cost of this program. And I agree with the Mayor Pro Tem. You should know what it's costing the community if you're going to do something, because it's not fair to sell it incorrectly. Absolutely agree. But I also look at, for example, they said we needed 600 units a year. We're building 350. I know that with a 3% vacancy rate, that's going to generate more housing and homelessness. And the numbers I'm going to give you, I was given by Meg Martin when I ran in 2017, and you know those numbers are going to be wrong. If we simply have homeless folks in camps, we're spending between per person $200 and $300 per day, and if they end up in the hospital, $3,000 a day. Whereas if we put into people into affordable, permanently supportive housing, we're looking at closer to $40 to $50 a day. The community worked on the one community plan very, very much, put their heart into it. It was a cross-sectional saying that we needed to do this. It's in our one community plan. It's the whole section number 2. Our comp plan talks about it. I remember Amy Buckler coming and doing the housing needs assessment and showing this great presentation saying that we cannot affect market rate. We can affect affordable housing, but we have to build affordable house or market rate. And then two last things. She presented rental data, which has stuck in my head forever. The assumption is that the 8-year MFTE for downtown is building high-end market rate rental properties. When she went in and looked at the average rental in downtown compared to West Side and Lacey, she found that it was actually below, on average, Lacey and the west side of Olympia. So 8-year MFTE is not building high-end market rate. It is actually building, like Councilmember Madrone, our workforce. ICLEI said the single number one thing a city can do for climate change is densify. Absolutely, 100% densify. This is a way to get there. And as it's been said over and over and over, it's not the only tool in our toolbox, because I can't build a boat with one tool. We can't build affordable housing or housing with one tool. We have many. And so that is why I'm gonna support it, but I'm gonna acknowledge it's going to cost the community money. And yet, if we do not do that, it's gonna cost us a lot more money.
All right, thank you. Anyone else want to speak to the motion? I think I already asked Councilmember Payne. So we have a motion to approve item 6C this evening and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you for hanging with us this evening and our change of location and all that. So at this point, we need to go back to our public commenters who have been waiting patiently. I have a list of who is still in the queue, so this should go pretty quickly. Kelly, we're going to start with Nicole Hughes, followed by Kyle Schrader, followed by Jesse Taylor, and the timer is back up on the screen.
Nicole is traveling.
All right, so Nicole Hughes will start us off. We
Hello.
can see you.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening. My name is Nicole Hughes. I am here today to express my deep disappointment with the city's adopted ceasefire resolution. As a matter of principle, I disagree with the opening premise of the resolution, which affirms the right to exist for both Palestine and Israel. States do not have an inherent right to exist. People do. No state has a right to exist except by the mutual consent of those it purports to govern. As an apartheid state, so-called Israel intentionally and proudly disenfranchises its non-Jewish residents, thereby negating any legitimacy it presumes to have. The resolution that this council passed earlier this evening fails to recognize the root causes of the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people, which are the past 75 years of settler colonialism, white supremacy, land theft, apartheid, and US-funded military occupation. Instead, the city's resolution vaguely frames the conflict in Palestine as one of a religious nature, which it fundamentally is not. In addition to being misleading, this framing also ignores the many anti-Zionist Jewish voices that are engaged in the fight for Palestinian liberation, including my own as your direct constituent. I'm also dismayed by the process by which the city's resolution was organized and drafted, which did not include input from the Olympia residents who have come before the council of their own accord to advocate for a permanent ceasefire. Through this opaque, limited process, the city instead prioritized alignment with local Zionist-affiliated interests. In closing, I would like to again express my support for the grassroots organized resolution that was transmitted to the council in November. Free Palestine.
Thank you. Next, we have Kyle Schrader, followed by Jesse Taylor, followed by Judy Barden.
Kyle has since dropped off the list.
Okay, so we'll go to Jesse Taylor.
He's traveling.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I don't have very carefully prepared comments tonight. I was busy with some other stuff earlier. But just wanted to say that this process that you did, I'm sure you heard from plenty of people earlier tonight, that it was pretty disappointing. And all of you have a very visible position. Last week, Dante Payne, asked like, why do we care what your personal opinions are? And the thing is, you all have, and you asked if, yeah, you're shaking your head. You asked if we were going to, target you individually. And, it's like what we want to, you have a very visible position. And, you can use that position to influence things. You're talking about how y'all don't have any influence over the Middle East. And then Cheryl Selby says that she's just getting back from a trip from the COP28 in the Middle East. Y'all have visibility and influence, and it. And you can use that position to do the right thing. And it's not that hard. It's just a matter of being a decent human being and, speaking out against the mass murder of children, against ethnic cleansing, things that you've seen all of the evidence and you know what you're doing. You're deliberately removing these things, from this resolution. And there's no excuse that you are doing it out of ignorance. There's like a choice that you're making, a conscious choice to do that, which is just really disturbing. Honestly, it's just like shows this sort of like self-serving, like just selfish behavior, where you're so concerned about maintaining office and not displeasing, trying to walk this middle ground where you don't upset anybody, that you literally can't even condemn the mass murder of children. And I don't know how those of you who are parents can look your kids in the eye. It's really, honestly, just really sad and disturbing. And I'm glad that everybody delegitimized your process tonight. And it's a shame. Thank you.
Next, we have Judy Barden, followed by Walt Jorgensen, our last commenter.
Judy is traveling.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. After listening to the presentation on housing allocations, this is not easy planning and you have a tough job. Nonetheless, I'm against the multifamily tax exemption. To give developers this exemption, the tax is shifted to all property owners, including those on limited fixed incomes and eventually onto renters in the form of higher rents. The city has never calculated the amount of the tax shift before tonight. I expected to see estimates presented on tonight's agenda, but didn't find any. We've been asking for these estimates for a long time. Presenting them in the meeting leaves the public no time to scrutinize them. I've worked in New York City as a visiting nurse and gone into low-income projects to care for patients. They are not pretty places. I worry about them being created in Olympia with economic segregation. There is little in this proposal to support diversity and equity, and instead it supports exclusionary zoning. In the provisions for the 12-year exemption, all units must be at 80% or less of the area median income. However, 80% is not affordable to many in Olympia, and no or higher income people will be included in these buildings. Then there is the 8-year tax exemption with no affordable housing included. It is designed for market rate housing, and the in lieu of fees allows strictly affordable housing to be built elsewhere, away from more expensive housing. These three provisions taken together will create economic segregation. Future analysis of the impacts of the MFTE will be important to see if we are getting diversity, equity, and affordability that we hope for. Thank you for allowing me comment.
Thank you. And last we have Walt Jorgensen.
Walt is traveling.
Start your video. Where? There.
We can hear you.
Yeah. 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 Shh, be quiet. I'm looking for the video, but okay. The ordinance you just approved in item 6C on the agenda exempts a few property owners in Olympia from having to pay any property tax on the buildings on their land. And the city has the authority to relieve them from paying not only the tax due to the city, but all the taxes due to all the other taxing entities as well. That means that the city can unilaterally, don't have to get anybody's permission, give away tax money that would have been paid to, say, the Olympia School District or the state of Washington. But they don't have to worry, do they? Because you've got them covered with money from all the other Olympia taxpayers. You're going to shift the tax burden caused by this exemption over onto the rest of us. To make up the deficit, we will all simply be taxed at a higher rate. It is interesting how we refer to this process. For 6 to 7 taxpayers, or maybe 20 or 30, we don't know how many yet, this is an exemption. For 20 to 30,000 others, it's an additional tax that's shifted from the developers to them. But it's referred to as a multifamily tax exemption program, not a tax increase program. It's named for the few that will benefit, not the many who pay. So let me just leave you with a couple of questions. And that is, how much more will the average Olympia property taxpayer be paying with this program in place? And then, why wasn't this on the most recent ballot as a proposition for Olympians to vote on? Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes everyone that had signed up this evening for in-person and remote public comment. Are there any additional comments from the council? All right. So that concludes our regular business evening. We're on to council reports. And what I would like to do is encourage people, if they have something to report, I know it's late, but do it now, because next week, there just might not be anybody left with the gavel. I'll be hitting the gavel. Because, yeah, I know. So if that's applicable, let's do some reports. So I'll start to the left, Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Selby. One item is just to keep an eye out for me for an email from me in the next few days. I'll send you a link to the Thurston County, to the Economic Forecast Expo that I went to with Mike Reed last week. There's some really great presentations, and I'll send you that when I have it all, because it was really cool, especially I won't go deep, but to learn about some of the work they're doing around the hydrogen plant in Lewis County, including having found an automobile manufacturer and a mine truck manufacturer that will come to that site. And the biggest learning for me was, and I don't know if you all, maybe you're ahead of me on this, but the fuel for creating all of that hydrogen that will be then burned in vehicles is all of the dry wood waste that's laying around in the forests in the region. So I think it's a win-win as long as we can make sure that environmental protections are in place for the air quality.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Councilmember Nguyen.
Nothing to report. If I think of something, I'll email you all.
Thank you. Councilmember Partially.
I have nothing this week, but I'm sure you want to hear a lot next week. I know you do.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Gilman.
2 super fun end of the year items. One was last week, I was able to help host the Intercity Transit's first in-person holiday gathering in 3 years. And I gave them a quick, Letterman style top 10 things that happened. I'm just going to give you the top couple 3, but 3 different service changes across this one calendar year, adding on to the fixed route schedules that got us up to 88% of pre-COVID time schedules. And that's administratively, that's a huge deal to 3 times redo the schedule books, redo the routes and the schedules of the employees. Hired 94 new staff this year, including 54 new drivers. That was continuous recruitment and continuous training and orienting folks. And it was the 30th anniversary of the Amtrak Centennial Station, run by volunteers. So there's just a couple of highlights. And then Monday morning, I had the really good fortune to meet a State Department tour who came to Olympia to see our creative district of 16 people who were everything from practicing artists to museum director and theater director and provincial cultural promoter person. They were an astounding group, and we had our arch staff and Mike Reed help lead them on a tour of some highlights around Olympia. They were so excited. They were having to push them to get back into the van to go to Seattle, and they're full of questions and wanting to look at one more shop downtown. So it was a beautiful morning. All right.
Thank you for filling in for me on that one. I was very jealous, but I was so pleased that you could do it and represent. So thank you. Councilmember Madrone.
I've got nothing to report, though I do have Transportation Policy Board early tomorrow morning and then RHC later in the day. So if I do have a report from either of those, I will email it in advance of the next meeting.
Rock. Thank you. You know, you can always email too.
Are you looking
those
at me?
reports? Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Anytime. All right. Councilmember Payne, do you have anything to report?
Nothing to report. Thank you.
All right. City Manager, anything to report?
I have two items, but they're happy items. One is, and we all heard it roll by, tonight was the last night of our annual holiday parade. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank staff in just about every department who participates in the holiday parade. It started during the pandemic as a way to bring some joy to the community. And it's just continued on because it's gotten so much positive community input. And it just gets better and bigger and better every single year. And I've had the opportunity most years, didn't line up for me this year to go ride with them, but most years I do ride along. And the amount of care that the staff puts into putting that together is just remarkable. And it's just another example of the amazing work that the staff of this city do to bring some joy. So I just want to thank them for that. And then related to that, just a story. Each year, our police department does Shop with a Cop around the holidays to bring some presents and joy to low-income families. And they did it last week, and my wife just happened to be at Target on the day they were doing it. And she happened to overhear a conversation with a little boy to one of the officers and said, "Well, can I get something for my mom and for my dad and for my sister?" And the response was, "We're going to get you everything you need for everyone." And the look on his face, she just said, "I walked out to my car and I cried." Yeah. And so just little impacts across that make big differences across the community that are happening by our staff. And so I just want to highlight those two things tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for ending it on such a warm note. And with no further business before the Olympia City Council, we're adjourned.